Chapter 549. Of course, Zheng Xianmeng was not from the devil cult. For so many years, Zheng Xianmeng had always been the leader of the righteous path in the world and the center of the divine central continent's cultivation world. Everything he did was on the side of righteousness and justice. Even if there were the occasional blemishes or scum, they were few and far between. Putting everything else aside, just looking at the respect that the people of the world had for the true immortal alliance over the years was enough. On the other hand, the devil cult had been a devil who did all kinds of evil things in the eyes of the people for thousands of years. There was a world of difference between the two. However, today, Lu Chen heard such a sentence from perfected Lord Tianlan. Given perfected Lord Tianlan's status, such words would immediately cause a commotion. Even if it wasn't a heavy blow to the true immortal alliance's position as the ruler of the world, it would at least weaken it. As for perfected Lord Tianlan's own prestige, it would be a great hindrance. Perhaps this was also the reason why he said this to Lu Chen in private? Lu Chen had regained his composure by this time, but he still frowned and said to perfected Lord Tianlan, "Why did you suddenly say such a thing? Are you too free?" Logically speaking, a disciple shouldn't speak to his master in such a manner, let alone someone like perfected Lord Tianlan. However, Lu Chen was clearly different and had a special status in perfected Lord Tianlan's heart. He didn't get angry after hearing Lu Chen's words. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "You're still too young. You don't have a broad enough perspective and you don't see enough things." Nowadays, Zheng Xianmeng looks like he is unrivaled in the world and respected by the people in the secular world. It is a scene of prosperity for generations to come. But is this really a good situation? Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "I naturally know some of the dirty things that the Immortal Alliance does in private, but this kind of thing is inevitable. Gold has no feet, and no man is perfect. How can he really stand this? But no matter what, Zheng Xianmeng ruling the world is still much better than the devil cult, right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head with an indifferent expression. However, there seemed to be a hint of melancholy in the depths of his eyes. "You don't understand. It's just that it looks fine now. With power in hand and no external enemies restricting them, all the factions and cultivators in the Celestial Alliance changed." A sliver of mockery appeared on his face. He said, "You've rarely been to the Celestial Dragon Mountain in the past decade or so there are some things that you might not know. However, I've seen everything from beginning to end. From the beginning of the devil cult's decline, there were some people who had ulterior motives, but it was not obvious at that time. After the battle in the desolate valley, after we inflicted heavy losses on the devil cult and the general situation was settled, some people became arrogant and domineering. Their thoughts had long shifted to other things. Those who wanted money and those who wanted to fight for power were the only ones left. Only Fuyunji was still fighting with the devil cult. There were even many people behind them who wanted us to suffer together. Until a few days ago, when the last batch of people of the devil cult was finally wiped out, the people in the Immortal Alliance no longer had any scruples and began to do all kinds of things. I believe you have heard of those evil things?" Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, he said, "I have heard of those things. Although some of them are not pleasant to hear, but in the end, it is nothing more than scheming and fighting for power." He looked up at perfected Lord Tianlan with a trace of puzzlement in his eyes. He said, "I thought that you are already used to these things and should not care at all?" Yes, what Lu Chen found strange was this. Bullying the good, right? No, fighting and infighting, right? No, suppressing the younger generation to form a clique, right? These were all wrong, but it was all set on the surface. For thousands of years, who did not do this? That was human nature. There were only so many good things in power. If you did not fight for them, others would naturally come to fight for them. What's more, if there were no benefits, who would come here to work? Even Lu Chen felt that this logic was perfectly justified. Even if he encountered injustice and couldn't stand it, he would step in if he had the ability to do so. If he couldn't, he would just watch from the sidelines. Who was perfected Lord Tianlan? Why was his brain damaged? And if he really wanted to argue about it, perfected Lord Tianlan himself was not clean for so many years. Fuyunji was a typical clique fighting, and he had cultivated them into the most powerful and ferocious force in the world. There was no need to talk about fighting for power. Just look at his prestige now. And there were all kinds of other things that were simply too many to count. His words today were not aimed at anyone else, but at the damned Baldy himself, right? Looking at Lu Chen's surprised eyes, perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to know what Lu Chen was thinking at the moment. He did not look embarrassed, but just chuckled and said, "You see, I was not capable in the past, so I could only use this to rise. But now it's different." Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. He could not help but look at perfected Lord Tianlan a few more times. The damn Baldy looked normal and did not look like he had gone mad. But thinking about it, it was impossible for this person to go mad. Sometimes, Lu Chen even felt that even if he went mad, this guy would probably always be high and mighty like a god. However, at this point, Lu Chen could tell that perfected Lord Tianlan's words did not seem to be joking. After letting out a sigh, Lu Chen felt a sense of helplessness at not being able to see through the person in front of him. He said, "Forget it. Can you give me a clear answer? What do you want?" After pausing for a moment, he added, "But I still feel that you're thinking too much. The Immortal Alliance is different from the Fiend cult." Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "The rise and fall of power is a cycle. There's nothing new about it. When the Fiend cult rose back then, it was also with the thought of clearing the universe and benefiting the people. But now, it has still committed countless evil deeds. The chaos that Xianxia is in right now is very much like when the Fiend cult first rose. In that case, instead of letting the Immortal Alliance fall and harm the people in the world in the future, I might as well." "Hey!" Lu Chen suddenly interrupted him and called out. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked up at Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at him with a solemn expression and deep gaze. After a while, he said slowly, "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." Lu Chen took a deep breath. The blood moon in the sky shone down, making both his and perfected Lord Tianlan's faces look dark red and hideous. He looked at perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes, which were slightly red because of the blood moon, and said in a low voice, "From what you said just now, you seem to think that you can make a decision for all the people in the world and choose a better path for them, right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded without hesitation. "Of course," he said with a sneer. "There are billions of living beings in the world and many cultivators are mediocre and short-sighted. They are like ants who do not know the height of the world and do not know the stars. The creation of the world naturally needs someone to guide it." Lu Chen's expression seemed to turn ugly as he asked in a low voice, "You're that person? Who else but me? But what you said just now, didn't you want the lives of the people in the world too? The lives that they will live." Perfected Lord Tianlan said it on behalf of Lu Chen. His tone was firm and his expression was relaxed. "The life that I choose for them is the best." Chapter 550. Amidst the blood-colored light, Lu Chen gradually walked away. Looking at the back of the young man, perfected Lord Tianlan's expression was calm. His eyes flickered slightly, but no one knew what he was thinking. From here to the end of the long street, Lu Chen walked all the way, but he did not look back even once. Did he have a guilty conscience, or did he completely trust perfected Lord Tianlan and never had any doubts? When Lu Chen's back completely disappeared, perfected Lord Tianlan slowly retracted his gaze. At this moment, he was the only one left in the huge, mysterious underground city. Everything was silent, except for the strange red light above his head that was floating and sprinkling down. His figure looked a little lonely. Standing on the street of the immortal city, Old Ma looked at the underground entrance that was heavily guarded and tightly surrounded by cloth and sighed in boredom. The weather was good today. Sunlight sprinkled down from the sky, warm and comfortable. Old Ma moved his body and stretched comfortably. Then he saw a sudden movement behind the cloth and Lu Chen walked out from there. Old Ma went up to greet him. Soon, Lu Chen also saw him and nodded to him. After walking past the group of guards, he walked towards Old Ma. When the two of them walked together, Old Ma first looked up and down at Lu Chen. After a while, it could be seen that he seemed to be relieved. Sensing Old Ma's reaction, Lu Chen looked at him and gestured for the two of them to walk forward together. Then, his expression did not change, but he smiled and said, "What's wrong? You seem to be very worried about me?" Old Ma shook his head and said, No. Your life is unparalleled in the world. So many things in the past didn't kill you. What will happen now?" Lu Chen scolded with a smile, but his expression was still indifferent. Except for Old Ma, other people probably thought that he was just talking about something irrelevant. However, after taking a few more steps forward, Lu Chen changed the topic and started to ask Old Ma about the changes in Fuyunji during the time he left the Immortal City. It's not a big change. It's nothing more than some meritorious rewards. After all, everyone has been working hard in the past few days and almost uprooted the devil cult. That's right, didn't we capture the other leader of the demon sect, the West Continent Hall Master Fante? These days they have been detained in Fuyunji, the interrogation should be almost done and they are ready to deal with the remaining evildoers of the devil cult. Lu Chen's footsteps paused slightly. After a moment of silence, he asked, "You still haven't made your move?" Old Ma spread his hands and said, "The foundation of the devil cult in the Immortal City has basically been destroyed by us. Fan Tue's territory is at the West Continent. Even if we go there, we will need some time to prepare. Furthermore, the overall situation is set. The remaining demons are not worth mentioning. We can just send some people over." Lu Chen snorted and said, "I remember that Fuyunji treated such things as the most important thing in the past. No matter where the remaining evildoers of the devil cult were, we would deal with them immediately and rush over as fast as we could." Old Ma smiled and said, "Things are different now." Lu Chen nodded and did not say anything else. He continued walking forward. Old Ma walked beside him and told him some of the recent movements of the other halls in Xianxia along the way. It sounded very calm and was completely the same as usual. There were almost no changes. However, as he listened, Lu Chen's frown became tighter and tighter. When Old Ma was almost done and he stopped to take a breath, Lu Chen suddenly asked, "That's all?" Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "That's about it. Of course, there are some other things, but they are all small matters and not important." Lu Chen looked up at the clear sky and frowned. Old Ma looked at him and said, "What's wrong? Is there something wrong?" Lu Chen said, "You also saw the blood sea vision in the sky, right?" Old Ma nodded. Lu Chen sneered and said, "This vision doesn't seem to be a good omen. Even so many ordinary practitioners in the city escaped. There are so many talents and halls on Mount Tianlong, but in the end they didn't see it." Old Ma fell silent and did not speak for a long time. Lu Chen pondered for a while, but shook his head and smiled bitterly. "I'm afraid there are too many smart people in this world." Immortal City was the largest city in the world. It was the location of the headquarters of Xianxia and also the center of the cultivation world in the vast land of the Shenzhou continent. This city was unimaginably large, and there were countless people living in it. In this city, there was no doubt that Xianxia's forces were the largest and most powerful, and Fuyunji's hall was even more outstanding. But even if it was Xianxia and Fuyunji, they also had dark corners that they could not see. In this city, there were also many other small forces. They huddled together to survive. Of course, they did not dare to fight against a behemoth like Xianxia. If they did that kind of brainless thing, they would be smashed to pieces. However, no matter what, it was impossible for one person to eat all the good things in the world, even if it was as strong as the Fuyunji under the rule of figures like Zheng Xianmeng and Lord Tianlan. Therefore, there were many such small forces, and they also lived well in Immortal City. Even Zheng Xianmeng turned a blind eye to them. Far away from the White Tiger district where there were many incidents during this period of time, in a secluded tavern in the Black Tortoise district of Immortal City, at this moment, there was a young and handsome man sitting alone drinking. He was the only one in the entire tavern. It seemed that business was bleak. No one knew how it had been maintained all these years, or perhaps customers would only come at other times. This man was he. He poured and drank by himself. The speed at which he drank was neither too fast nor too slow. After a while, when he had probably drunk half a pot of wine, the curtain at the back door of the tavern was lifted by someone. It was the tavern owner, a skinny old man, who walked out. The tavern assistant, who was originally standing by the counter with a strange expression and staring at He, came up to him. The tavern owner gave him a few instructions in a low voice with a faint expression. The assistant replied with an "oh," then moved a stool to the entrance of the tavern and sat down directly, as if he was guarding the door. The tavern owner then walked to He's side and smiled at him. The smile seemed to be insincere and not warm. Instead, it was rather sinister. He said, "Sir, please follow me." He glanced at him. For some reason, an inexplicable struggle flashed through the depths of his eyes. However, very soon, his expression calmed down again. He nodded slowly, stood up, and followed the tavern owner into the back of the tavern that was hung with curtains. In front of them was a long and narrow passage, and then they saw the tavern's kitchen. It seemed a little dirty, but the two of them did not care. The tavern owner directly walked to a cupboard where bowls and chopsticks were placed. He forcefully moved the cupboard away, and a secret door that was only half the height of a person was revealed on the wall behind the cupboard. The tavern owner pushed the door open, then turned back to look at He. He frowned and looked at him somewhat unhappily. The tavern owner shrugged and said indifferently, "The person you're looking for is waiting for you over there. Whether you want to go or not, it's up to you." He was silent for a moment. Then he lowered his head without saying a word and went through the secret door. With a bang, the secret door closed behind him. Then there was a rumbling sound. The skinny tavern owner must have pushed the cupboard back to its original position. Chapter 551. Behind the secret door was a long and narrow secret passage. There were a few candles hanging on the wall lit up, emitting a little light to illuminate the path here, but the passage was still a little dim. But looking at the candles burning quietly, there must be some kind of vent nearby. He looked at the passage in front of him, and at the same time, he reached behind him and gently pushed the secret door. The door was firm and unmoving. It seemed to have been locked. He didn't panic, but just frowned slightly. After pondering for a moment, he began to walk forward. Walking in this dark secret passage, it formed a sharp contrast with the bustling streets of the immortal city that he had passed through before. This place seemed to be a different world from the immortal city outside. It was very quiet, making people think that it was actually in a corner of the immortal city. As he walked, he soon felt that the road under his feet began to extend downwards. But after walking for a while, the secret passage actually began to go up again, as if he had gone around a big pit. Not long after, he saw the end of the secret passage in front of him. There was also a door at the end of the road. The wooden door was solid and heavy, and it was quietly closed. No one knew what was at the door. He looked at the door for a while, then walked over and opened the door, but there was no bright light shining in, and it was still dark in front of him. With the dim light of the candles in the passage behind him, he took a closer look and found that there seemed to be a wooden wall behind the door. To be exact, it seemed to be the back of another cabinet. He shook his head, and no longer hesitated. He reached out and pushed hard. The cabinet let out a low sound and slowly moved away. Bright light shone down and shone on his face. He walked out and immediately found himself in a clean, beautiful, and somewhat gentle room. The dressing table was brightly lit, and a box of rouge was placed on the table. There were also 2 golden hairpins, a pearl flower, and a gemstone necklace lying lazily on the side. Inside the hibiscus tent, there was a peony quilt and a silky gown hanging at the head of the bed. It was a lady's boudoir. He was stunned for a moment. A trace of astonishment and awkwardness flashed across his face. He naturally had a reason and purpose for coming here this time. He had also thought about the twists and turns and unexpected situations that might occur. He even considered whether he would be ambushed when he stepped out. However, he never expected that he would walk into the boudoir of an unmarried woman. A strange man entered the boudoir of an unmarried girl? It sounded like a scene that could ruin a person's reputation. It should be known that the Kunlun party was a 1,000-year-old sect, and they were very strict with some old rules. Fortunately, there seemed to be no one in the house at the moment. The unknown owner should have gone out. He breathed a sigh of relief subconsciously. Just as he was considering whether he should leave immediately, he suddenly heard light footsteps coming from outside the house. Someone came to the door of the boudoir. He Yi's face slightly sunk, a glint flashed in his eyes. He suddenly stretched out his leg and kicked backwards. The cabinet slid back to its original position, perfectly covering that secret door. His body was like a fish swimming in the water. In a flash, he silently flashed to the back of that door. Creak! The door was opened. The door opened in front of He Yi, covering his figure. He looked through the gap and saw a graceful lady walking in with light and quick steps. Although he could not see her face, that graceful figure, fair skin, beautiful side profile, and the faint fragrance that wafted over seemed to tell him that this lady was a rare beauty. She did not turn around to close the door. Even though if she closed the door and looked up, she would be able to see He Yi's figure. She walked straight to the dressing table and sat down in front of the mirror. Then the mirror reflected her beautiful, flawless, charming and affectionate face. She smiled at the mirror. At that moment, the whole room seemed to brighten up a bit. Then she picked up a golden hairpin on the table and inserted it into her hair. At the same time, she said, "Hello, my surname is Song, my name is Song Wenji." He took a deep breath, then walked out from behind the door. He looked at the lady's back from behind, then nodded, bowed, and said expressionlessly, "I am He. Nice to meet you, Miss Song." Old Ma. Back on Tianlong Mountain, Lu Chen and Old Ma walked through the mountain road. After seeing the figures of Fuyunji Hall and Kunlun Hall in the distance, Lu Chen suddenly called him. Old Ma looked back at him and said, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "Do you think there is anyone in this world who is always right? Whether it is the way they do things, or what they say, or what they think about anything, they are always right." Old Ma was startled, then shook his head and said, "That's impossible. How can there be such a person? If there really is such a person, I think he is not much different from a god." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Yes, there is no one in this world who does not make mistakes. The only ones who do not make mistakes are probably the gods." Old Ma was a little surprised and said, "I remember that you never believed in these things before." Lu Chen laughed and said, "You are right, and I still don't believe it." As they were talking, the two had already approached the hall of Fuyunji. Old Ma looked inside and said, "I heard that after you came back, you still haven't gone to see Hall Leader Shuang?" Lu Chen said, "She is very busy, and I have nothing to do, so I won't go and disturb her." "Well, anyway, you have a backer now, you can do whatever you want." Old Ma muttered with a little envy and jealousy. Lu Chen did not get angry. After scolding him with a smile, he casually asked, "I remember that before I went into closed-door training last time, in addition to continuing to track down the remnants of the devil cult, Fuyunji was also integrating a group of experts from the Kunlun party. How is it going now?" Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "The progress is not bad, of course, definitely not as good as those people in Fuyunji who have been training for many years. However, those cultivators from the Kunlun party are all loyal to Lord Perfected and can be considered obedient. After this period of time, they should be able to be put to use." Lu Chen's footsteps paused, a trace of a complicated expression flashed across his face. He raised his head and looked at the sky. After a while, he said, "Well, they are all the elites of the Kunlun party, their qualifications are naturally good." At this point, he seemed to think of something and waved his hand at Old Ma and said, "I have something to attend to, I will go first, I will look for you later." Old Ma said, and greeted him, but he walked towards the direction of the hall of Fuyunji. It seemed that he was going in to look for someone. Lu Chen glanced at his back, then turned and walked in another direction. After walking on the mountain road for a while, he came to the front of a familiar house. He looked at the door and frowned slightly. After standing quietly for a while, he went up and knocked on the door. "Knock, knock, 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 junior sister? Sue, are you there?" Chapter 552. Most people wouldn't change the way they address someone. For example, common relatives, the father was the father, the mother was the mother, and the brothers and sisters would only address each other once in a lifetime. It was impossible to call someone big brother today and little brother tomorrow. This was common sense. After Lu Chen knocked on the door and called out, he felt a little strange and awkward. Then he remembered that over the years, since he knew Su Qingjun, There seemed to have been several different ways of addressing her. Senior sister? Master? And the junior sister, just now? But if he calculated it carefully, even the junior sister, just now, was wrong. According to the seniority in the Kunlun party, the current him should be at least one generation higher than Su Qingjun. It was not too much to call her martial niece, and she should also call him martial uncle according to etiquette. It was just that after Su Qingjun came to Mount Tianlong and they met again after a few years, they seemed to have forgotten this point. There was movement in the room. It seemed that someone was whispering something, and then the sound of footsteps came to the door. After a while, the door was opened. Su Qingjuan's slender and beautiful figure appeared behind the door. She looked at Lu Chen, nodded to him, and said, "You're here." Lu Chen smiled and was about to speak, but he suddenly saw another petite figure poking her head out from behind Su Qingjun. It was White Lotus. The young girl reached out and hugged Su Qingjuan's waist. It seemed that the relationship between the two women was very close. At the same time, White Lotus's face had a bit of disgust. She glared at Lu Chen, and then said to Su Qingjun, "Sister Su, don't forget what I said to you." Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. He subconsciously felt that there was something in White Lotus's words, and it was most likely not something good. He couldn't help but look at Su Qingjun. He saw that Su Qingjuan's face was stunned for a moment, and then she shook her head helplessly, as if she was helpless. However, when Su Qingjun noticed that Lu Chen was looking at her with a puzzled look, she quickly put away her helpless expression. Instead, she looked at Lu Chen with a faint smile, and there seemed to be a deeper meaning in her eyes. Lu Chen didn't quite understand what secrets there were between the two women, but it didn't seem to be good. He coughed, and after thinking for a while, he said to Su Qingjun, "Do you have time? I have something to tell you." Su Qingjun saw that Lu Chen's expression was serious and didn't seem to be joking. She immediately straightened her expression and nodded. "Yes, come in and talk." Who knew that Lu Chen didn't move, but his eyes glanced at White Lotus behind Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, and White Lotus also reacted. She immediately became angry and said angrily, "What do you mean?" Lu Chen smiled and said, it's nothing, don't think too much." As he said, he turned to Su Qingjun and said, "Today's weather is good, and there are a few beautiful places in the back mountain. I think you haven't been there since you came here. I will take you there for a walk, and we can chat on the way." White Lotus was so angry that she gritted her teeth. This still told people not to think too much. She was about to open her mouth to mock, but Su Qingjun looked at Lu Chen from the side. After hesitating for a moment, she nodded and said, "All right." White Lotus snorted and grabbed Su Qingjuan's wrist. She said in a low voice, "Sister Su, don't be fooled by him again." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and stared at White Lotus. What did she mean by being fooled by him? She even added the word, again. Su Qingjun looked at White Lotus and her expression softened. She touched her head lovingly and smiled. But she still stepped out of the room and said to Lu Chen, "Let's go." Lu Chen nodded and walked side by side with her. Behind them, White Lotus looked at the back of the two. She only felt that this man and woman were actually quite compatible. She couldn't help but be somewhat stunned. But then she snorted and indignantly walked back into the room, slamming the door shut. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun both heard the angry slamming of the door behind them. They looked at each other. There was no strange expression on their faces. Only Su Qingjun smiled slightly apologetically. Along the way, there were fewer pedestrians on the road. The ancient trees gradually increased. In the surrounding forest, there were gradually quiet bird cries, chirping, lively and happy, adding some vitality to the forest. From home to here, along the way, Su Qingjun didn't speak. Lu Chen couldn't help but look at the woman beside him. His gaze was deep, as if there were many hidden meanings. Su Qingjun seemed to feel something. She also turned to look at him and said, "What is it?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "It seems like I haven't been alone with you like this for a long time." Hearing this, Su Qingjun was startled at first, and then there was a moment of confusion. When they were on Kunlun Mountain, outside her cave residence, Lu Chen built a straw hut. At that time, as long as she left the cave residence, It was time for the two to face each other alone. Looking back on those days that they spent together, it seemed like a very, very long time had passed. Those days in those memories seemed to be very ordinary. But for them, those peaceful days seemed like they could never find them again. She didn't speak for a while. Then she heard Luchan suddenly ask, "That's right, why haven't I seen you wearing that flame feather shawl recently?" Su Qingjun was stunned at first, but then she understood what Luchan was talking about. After shaking her head, she said, "The color of that shawl is too bright. After my younger brother died, my parents were sad, so I didn't wear it anymore." The younger brother she was talking about was naturally Sumo. As for how he died, both of them knew in their hearts. This was also a knot and gap between the two of them that could not be solved until now. Luchan also became silent. However, he had no intention of regretting it, but he knew the price that Su Qingjun had to pay for it. He looked at Su Qingjun and said in a low voice, "It's been hard on you." Su Qingjun's expression turned indifferent. After taking a few steps forward, she said, "What do you want to say to me? Say it." Luchan nodded and said, "A while ago, we captured an important figure of the devil cult. He is the hall master of the Western continent, Fan Tu." Under Fuyunji's interrogation, he revealed some of the remaining devil cult members and their arrangements in the Western continent. These things were all told to me by Hall Master Shuiying. Currently, Fuyunji is already preparing to send people over to deal with and capture him. However, because there are also many other important matters to attend to in Fuyunji recently, most of the elites have to stay in the Immortal City. We are suddenly short on manpower. Su Qingjun raised her eyebrows. She could hear the hidden meaning in Lu Chen's words. With a tinge of doubt, she asked, "You want my help?" Lu Chen looked at her and said, "Actually, I don't need you to do too much. Now, Fan Tue has confessed that there is an extremely well-hidden spy in our Kunlun party. After thinking about it, I still want you to make a trip over and deal with that spy." Su Qingjun frowned and said, "You want me to return to Kunlun Mountain and capture that spy from the devil cult?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "Yes. Other than you, I don't trust anyone else." As he spoke, he raised his eyes slightly with an indifferent expression. Intentionally or unintentionally, he glanced at the clear sky. Who knew when the horrifying sea of blood would appear in the sky again? Chapter 553. Nowadays, in the cultivation world, Xianxia Meng could be said to be the most powerful sect, and its strength was far superior to others. Even some famous sects that had been established for thousands of years were far inferior to Xianxia Meng in terms of prestige. Of course, powerful sects like the Kunlun Party and the Tianluo sect had already become a part of Xianxia Meng in private, or it could be said that they had obtained a part of the highest power in Xianxia Meng. The most obvious thing was that among the 6 great perfected gods of Xianxia Meng, 4 of them were from such famous sections. Therefore, after all was said and done, the real rich and powerful sects in the cultivation world of the vast land of the divine land had probably lost a little in terms of reputation. After all, no one could compare to the resounding name of the true immortal alliance. However, in terms of actual benefits, these large sects might not necessarily suffer a loss. In fact, in many aspects, these large sects even obtained more benefits, both openly and secretly. The biggest benefit was that they had a righteous name. The cultivation world was originally a free world, which advocated strength and talent. At the same time, in the vast divine land, each sect often had their own territory. It was okay for the cultivation world to show off in their own territory, but when they went to other places, they had to restrain themselves. However, since the emergence of Xianxia Meng, the rules of this game had changed. Because in the Immortal Allies, everyone had an imperial sword and a righteous name, and no one dared to disobey their orders. This ever-victorious treasure was called justice, which was also called heaven's justice, and also called people's hearts. For the sake of heaven's justice, evil cults like the devil cult that tortured living beings and did all kinds of evil should naturally be suppressed, and the world should be ordered to attack them together. If there was any disobedience, it was equivalent to going against the righteous path of the world. No matter where you were, you would still have nowhere to hide. Perfected Lord Tianlan was awesome, right? Awesome. Deity transformation stage perfected cultivator was a heavenly genius. He was also a man of his word on Mount Kunlun. However, once he was out of the territory of Kunlun sect, his influence would not be as strong. But now, this lord's name had shaken the world, and he stood proudly above all living beings. His words and actions could actually shake the entire vast land of the divine land. His influence was everywhere. This was the advantage of the alliance of true immortals. This kind of invisible power was so great that today, everyone in the world was in awe, and no one dared to disobey it. At least some people dared to doubt it, not to mention wanting to overthrow it. Unless he was a deranged lunatic. Sitting in the yard, Old Ma looked at Lu Chen as if he was an idiot and asked, Old Ma, and looked at Lu Chen. Xianxia Meng, it was already the dead of night. Lu Chen and Old Ma returned to the old house near the Shima Bridge, sat opposite each other, set up the dishes and wine, and drank with each other. The gentle night breeze blew past. It was very comfortable, but it seemed that the topic of the two people chatting was not quite right. There was no need to mention the relationship between Lu Chen and Old Ma. After more than 10 years, it was not an exaggeration to say that they were friends of life and death. Being looked at like that by Old Ma, he was not angry and even smiled, said, "What's wrong, can't I just ask?" Old Ma rolled his eyes, said, "Nonsense, is this something that can be casually asked? This is also because you have a backer behind you, you are not afraid of anything. If it was any other person and rashly said this, I'm afraid that they would immediately be sent to Fuyunji's prison to eat prison food." Lu Chen laughed, somewhat ruefully patted his knee, said, You don't say, the feeling of having a dead baldy as a backer is really not bad." Old Ma looked at him with disdain, and then as if he thought of something his expression became more serious, said, "To be honest, you must be more respectful and polite to Xianxia Meng, at least this kind of opportunity is really something that many people in the world yearn for but cannot get." Lu Chen's smile faded a little, but after looking at Old Ma's expression for a moment he still smiled and said, "I understand, just that recently have you become old, you actually started to earnestly persuade people?" Old Ma waved his hand, but frowned and asked, "It has nothing to do with me being old or not, don't interrupt. I ask you, why would you suddenly ask about the comparison between the evil sect and Xianxia Meng out of nowhere?" Just sighing with emotion. Probably because it was late at night, Lu Chen looked a little tired, faintly said, "To be honest, of course I know that the evil sect has done all kinds of evil, they are the worst one, or else I would not have spent more than 10 years fighting with them until now." "But what?" Old Ma saw that he stopped muttering, could not help but asked. Lu Chen picked up the wine cup, took a sip, looked up at the night sky, said, "Even when the evil sect was at its strongest, it could not be compared to the current Xianxia Meng. In the past when the evil sect was doing evil, our Xianxia Meng's good faction heroes came forward one after another, fought against them, until now we almost completely suppressed the evil sect. But if one day when Xianxia Meng is doing evil in the world, who can resist?" He looked at Old Ma, his eyes deep, said, "I just thought of this by chance, so I asked you, when that time comes, what do you think we should do?" Old Ma was stunned, probably because Lu Chen's words were too shocking. It broke through his usual limit of imagination. After a while, Old Ma was stunned and said, "You must be crazy, our Xianxia Meng is fine, it has always been the world's good faction justice, how can it degenerate into the evil sect?" Yes, you are right, ha." Lu Chen laughed, poured wine for him and himself, smiled and said, "On this point, of course I think the same as you, that kind of thing is probably impossible. But occasionally I think, what if Xianxia Meng becomes evil, then what should we do? Do you think there is a way?" Old Ma touched his chin with his hand, clicked his tongue, frowned, thought for a moment, and said, "Well, you don't say, although this idea is absurd, if the Immortal Alliance really becomes evil, it seems that there is really nothing in the world that can resist and restrain it." Speaking of this, Old Ma paused, then shook his head and said, "But you don't have to worry about this. First, it is impossible. Second, when the car comes to the mountain, there will be a way. Maybe by then there will be some peerless heroes born, the times make the heroes." Lu Chen looked at him with a faint smile. Old Ma was a little scared by his stare, said, "Why are you looking at me like this?" Lu Chen said, "So, when the Immortal Alliance really becomes evil, you will put your hope on the illusory hero?" Old Ma sighed and said, "Other than that, what else can I do? Now that the Immortal Alliance is so strong and has suppressed the devil cult, it is invincible. Anyone or sect in front of the Immortal Alliance is just like an ant. No one has that ability." Lu Chen was silent for a long time, then looked up at the starry sky, looked at the stars. For many years he had risked his life in the battle with the devil sect. He had always thought that the devil sect demons were all madmen. However, at this moment, he thought about how the true Immortal Alliance behind him had unknowingly become such a huge and terrifying monster. He also thought about the burly man who led the group and made great achievements among them. No matter how he looked at it, he seemed to be tied together with the Immortal Alliance, life and death. But suddenly he murmured, his voice was so low that only Lu Chen could hear it, and he muttered to himself, "Damn Baldy, so you are the real crazy one." Chapter 554. No matter who was crazy, who was normal, or who was crazy, it was still unclear. In today's world, with perfected Lord Tianlan's fame and power, except for those perfected monarchs who were on par with him in the deification realm, almost everyone else had to look up to this giant, even perfected Yuanying who could be called an overlord. Lu Chen had seen perfected Yuanying in Zhengxianmeng on Mount Tianlong with his own eyes. He was silent and respectful in front of perfected Lord Tianlan. Even those perfected Yuanying who came from the 1,000-year-old Kunlun party also had an almost superstitious trust in this martial uncle. Perfected Lord Tianlan was the #1 person in Zhengxianmeng. The Kunlun party he came from naturally benefited the most from Zhengxianmeng's leadership of the world. Therefore, sometimes when Lu Chen looked around, he would find that among so many people, there seemed to be no one else who had doubts about perfected Lord Tianlan. It was not resistance, not opposition, just a feeling of doubt, but he did not see any of them. Lu Chen knew why this was the case. Apart from the fact that the damn Baldy was indeed talented and bold, he was almost always right. He also did things that almost no one else could do, and the most important thing was to suppress and destroy the devil cult. Although Elder Ghost had not been captured for the time being, anyone with some knowledge could see that the evil sect's foundation had basically been completely destroyed. This evil sect that had been entangled with the good faction for thousands of years had finally reached the end of its road. But just 10 or 20 years ago, the devil cult was still in a strong and prosperous situation. It was the hardest bone to chew in the world. The people of the Union of True Immortals shouted for justice, but no one was willing to face it directly. In the end, there was a long period of time when only perfected Lord Tianlan and Fuyunji that he had built single-handedly fought against the devil cult. 20 years later, the damn Baldy not only won, but also destroyed the devil cult. Looking back for so many years, perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to always prove that he was always right and never made mistakes. But would he make a mistake? Was there really a person who never made mistakes in this world? Lu Chen walked into the Kunlun Great Hall filled with thoughts. He immediately saw the Floating Clouds Division's Hall Master, Shui Ying, who had arrived earlier than him. At this moment, she was talking with true Lord Tianlan in the Great Hall. Of the two people, perfected Lord Tianlan sat casually with a relaxed expression and a calm expression. He would occasionally nod slowly, as if to confirm or affirm something. And now, Shui Ying, who was also famous throughout the world, was in charge of the Floating Clouds Agency, which caused people to tremble in fear at the mere mention of her name. However, at this moment, she seemed to be as obedient as a child. Her body was only half sitting on the chair, and her body was slightly leaning forward. As Lu Chen walked into the hall, Lord Tianlan and Shui Ying both turned to look at him. Lord Tianlan and Lord Tianlan. Lord after Lord and if. As for perfected Lord Tianlan, although he did not get up, he also nodded slightly at Lu Chen in acknowledgement. Lu Chen walked over. He first bowed to perfected Lord Tianlan, then smiled at Shui Ying. So Hall Master Shui is here. I even went to Fuyunji to look for you, but I made a wasted trip. Shui Ying smiled. I just happened to have something to report to Lord Perfected Lord, so I came here early in the morning. Is there something urgent, Junior Brother Lu? When Lu Chen heard Shui Ying call him Junior Brother Lu, he could not help but feel a little funny. Actually, when Shui Ying was not familiar with him, she had called him Young Master Lu. After he was officially accepted as a disciple by perfected Lord Tianlan, Shui Ying wanted to call him Young Master. However, this was rejected by both Lu Chen and perfected Lord Tianlan. After struggling for a while, Shui Ying decided to call him Junior Brother. It was close and useful. She had been working under perfected Lord Tianlan for many years and had always been his closest confidant. It was not too much for her to call him that. Lu Chen walked closer and said with a smile, "It's nothing urgent. I just want to ask about the remnants of the devil cult in the Western continent. There's no hurry. If you have something to say, you can tell Master first." Shui Ying nodded. However, she did not speak directly. Instead, she turned to look at perfected Lord Tianlan. There was a hint of inquiry in her eyes. Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "Speak. Lu Chen is not an outsider. There's no harm in letting him know." Shui Ying nodded. Lu Chen sat down on the seat next to her. Shui Ying said to perfected Lord Tianlan, roughly estimating, the number of cultivators who left the Immortal City in the past half a month has already reached 200,000. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. He did not expect that the first sentence he heard would be this. Furthermore, this number was much more than he had expected. It seemed that there were still many smart people who sought advantages and avoided disadvantages in this world. However, perfected Lord Tianlan did not seem to care at all. He only nodded slightly. He was too lazy to even change the expression on his face. Although he did not care, there were some things that Shui Ying had to ask. At that moment, she asked softly but cautiously, "Milord, there are indeed many people who have left. Furthermore, according to the reports from my spies, there are still many people who are preparing to leave or are about to leave. This number has even exceeded the previous number. Do you think we should do something?" Perfected Lord Tianlan snorted and said, "What do you want to do?" Shui Ying hesitated for a moment and said, "Perhaps we can slightly obstruct them or persuade some people to stay. After all, the Immortal City is where the headquarters of our Xianxia is located. It has always been known as the most prosperous place in the world. With so many people leaving in such a large number, it is indeed a little, not very good." Lu Chen rolled his eyes in his heart. He thought to himself, how is this not very good? With so many people fleeing the Immortal City in a panic, those who did not know what was going on would feel that something extremely important or extremely dangerous was about to happen in the Immortal City. That was why they left as if they were fleeing a disaster. Of course, this kind of premonition was actually not wrong to a certain extent. After all, there were so many smart people in the world. There were more or less people who could see some clues. However, with so many people leaving, it was more or less like a slap to Zheng Xianmeng's face. After all, the Immortal City was where the headquarters of Zheng Xianmeng was located. In other words, wouldn't there be so many people who felt that even the current leader of the world, Zheng Xianmeng, might not be able to deal with those strange signs? Lu Chen looked at perfected Lord Tianlan, only to see the burly bald man saying indifferently, "It's okay. It doesn't matter whether the Immortal Alliance is ugly or not. Moreover, those who left are just like ants. We don't have to care about their opinions." Shui Ying was startled for a moment. Lu Chen looked at her from the side and clearly saw a trace of shock in her eyes. It seemed that she did not quite agree with perfected Lord Tianlan's words. However, this trace of expression was really just a trace. It flashed by and disappeared in an instant. Shui Ying returned to her original respectful expression and said, "Yes, I understand." After that, Shui Ying thought for a while and said, "There's another thing. Fiyunji's spies in the Black Tortoise district reported that someone recently saw Song Wenji of the Heavenly Law Hall appear on the streets there twice." Lu Chen's heart skipped a beat. Then, he heard perfected Lord Tianlan sneer and said with a disdainful expression, "However, she's just that old man Tai whose nameless concubine. It's not a big deal for her to stroll around and buy things all day. Don't worry about it." "Yes." Shui Ying nodded. Lu Chen lowered his gaze and looked at his own hands in silence. Chapter 555. Shui Ying continued to report to perfected Lord Tianlan while Lu Chen listened quietly at the side. For a moment, there was only Shui Ying's clear and melodious voice drifting in the hall of Kunlun. It was like a woman whispering her thoughts in the night wind. However, the words in her words were cold and stern. The situation in the Immortal City was not too good. Many people were frightened by the strange blood sea vision in the sky. One reason was that the blood sea vision had appeared so many times and did not seem to be a coincidence. Another reason was that after so many signs, Xianxia and Meng still had not made any reaction until now. This made everyone more and more uncertain. Thinking of this, Lu Chen suddenly thought of something that he had neglected in his daily life. Ever since the blood sea vision appeared in the sky of the Immortal City, Xianxia had been quiet and acted as if nothing had happened. To outsiders, it was a little strange. However, perhaps it was because Xianxia and perfected Lord Tianlan were too famous and had completely overshadowed the people of the other halls in Xianxia. Therefore, people did not pay much attention to the reactions of the other forces in the Immortal Alliance. But in fact, other than perfected Lord Tianlan, there were 5 other divine transformation stage perfected lords in Xianxia who reacted. Perfected Lord Gu Yu of the Starry Hall made the biggest move. She sent many people into the underground cave. In the end, even the people of Xianxia had to give way to the people of the Starry Hall. No one knew what they had done down there for a long time. In comparison, the other perfected lords were quieter. Perfected Lord Tiehu from the Hall of Heavenly Law was originally more active. However, during the incident of capturing Fan Tui, a remnant of the devil cult, this upright and outspoken perfected lord seemed to have some information that could be used against him. Hence, he immediately became well-behaved. As for the other 3 deity transformation stage perfected monarchs, they each had their own halls. When the Blood Sea anomaly first appeared, they had also paid attention to it. However, as far as Lu Chen knew, the damned Baldi had secretly paid a visit to the cave abodes of the 3 perfected monarchs. Since then, there hadn't been much activity. Lu Chen didn't ask nor did he care that there might have been some sort of deal or trick involved in the process. For a person like him, his many years of experience had made him develop a personality that cared more about the results than the process. However, in Shui Ying's recent report to True Lord Tianlan, she had included the movements of the other 5 True Lords as well as the situation of the halls of the other 5 True Lords, starting from the minor to the major. Lu Chen didn't say anything. His expression was calm and indifferent. However, when he lowered his head slightly, his pupils couldn't help but contract. The most powerful people in Xianxia were the 6 True Lords of the Divine Transformation Realm. All the mountain powers originated from these 6 giants. In other words, Xianxia was monitoring everyone at the same time. At some point, Shui Ying's voice had stopped, and the hall had fallen into silence. Lu Chen slowly raised his head. He heard True Lord Tianlan say to Shui Ying calmly, "I know about these things. You did well. Also, keep a closer eye, especially on the people on Mount Celestial Dragon. Report to me if there are any unusual movements." Shui Ying acknowledged respectfully. She then turned to look at Lu Chen and said, "Junior brother Lu, did you say you had something to talk to me about?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "The devil cult is gone. The Immortal City has settled down. However, there are still some remnants in the world. 2 days ago, I heard that the bandit chief Fan Tui confessed that there were some demons from the devil cult remaining in the Western continent. Therefore, I made some arrangements and prepared to send someone over to join forces with the Kunlun sect that stayed behind to wipe them all out." True Lord Tianlan nodded slightly. His expression was calm. It seemed that he did not care much about such a small matter. Shui Ying, on the other hand, was still a little concerned after hearing this. She said, "This matter may not be easy to handle. The remaining people there are probably die-hard members who are loyal to the devil cult. Also, the person we send over to join forces with the Kunlun party must have some reputation. It won't be easy to choose, right?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "That is true. However, I have already chosen the person. It is Su Qingjun, a disciple of the Kunlun party. Firstly, she is intelligent and calm. She is strong enough to take on heavy responsibilities. Secondly, she was born and raised in Kunlun. She grew up in the Kunlun party and is very familiar with the seniors in the sect. With her planning, this matter will not be difficult. Shui Ying was startled. There was a slightly complicated look in her eyes. After glancing at Lu Chen, she did not say anything more. She just turned around and looked at True Lord Tianlan. Obviously, she did not want to make a decision on this matter. Instead, she handed the final decision to her boss. True Lord Tianlan closed his eyes slightly. He placed one hand on the back of the chair and tapped it lightly. The surroundings were quiet. Lu Chen and Shui Ying looked at him, waiting for his decision. After a while, True Lord Tianlan raised his head and looked deeply at Lu Chen. Then he nodded and said, "Approved." After saying that, he stood up and walked into the depths of the Kunlun temple without looking at the two of them. When the burly figure disappeared from his line of sight, Lu Chen let out a light sigh of relief. He glanced to the side from the corner of his eye and discovered that Shui Ying also had a faint expression of relief on her face. At the same time, Shui Ying also seemed to feel something. She turned to look at Lu Chen. Their gazes met. At first, they were silent. After a while, they suddenly smiled knowingly. There was nothing to be embarrassed about, and they both sighed. They walked out of the temple side by side. Shui Ying raised her head to look at the sky and suddenly said, "That Sister Su is a lucky person." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Not really. She has also suffered a lot. It's just that it's hard for her to talk about it." Shui Ying smiled and did not pursue the matter. She asked very directly, "Other than Su Qingjun, who else do you want to transfer away? Right now, the mountain, the foot of the mountain, and the immortal city are quite turbulent. People are needed everywhere. If you want too many, I can't do anything about it." Lu Chen's heart moved slightly. For a moment, he could not understand the meaning behind her words. It seemed like she would allow him to transfer one or two more people. Or was it just a casual test? He suddenly thought of White Lotus. To be honest, he did not know why he would suddenly think of this young girl, but it was at this moment that he thought of her. However, after thinking for a while, he shook his head at Shui Ying and said, "There's no need for others. Just Su Qingjun alone is enough." Shui Ying made an "oh" sound and said, "That's good." She said a few words to him and told him to go to Fuyunji to go through the formalities. Then she left. Lu Chen looked at her back. Under the bright sunlight, this famous and beautiful woman seemed to exude an astonishing charm from head to toe, dazzling the eyes of those who looked at her. At that moment, he seemed to have an illusion in his heart. This beautiful woman seemed to be firmly tied to the achievements of that damn baldy, true monarch Tianlan. As that damn baldy's might shook the world, Shui Ying seemed to have entered the most brilliant and dazzling era of her life. Other than that giant, who knew how many men in the world were willing to crawl at her feet. However, she was only willing to follow that huge figure and stand in the shadow behind him. Chapter 556. Why didn't he look for anyone else but you? White Lotus sat on the bed in the room and leaned against the wall as she said to Su Qingjun, "There are countless experts in Xianxia. Even in Fuyunji, there are many hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Why did he have to choose you?" Su Qingjun's expression was indifferent and she didn't reply. She didn't seem to be happy or angry, and no one knew what she was thinking at the moment. White Lotus looked at her and continued, "As for the reason that he went to the Western continent to familiarize himself with the people of the Kunlun party, that's even more unreliable. Not to mention that the whole of Fuyunji was founded by the ancestor of the Kunlun party, Supreme Tianlan. Just look at the elite disciples transferred from the Kunlun party this time. Which one of them doesn't meet this requirement?" The beautiful girl looked a little indignant. She pointed at her chest and said, "Let's not talk about others, but I should be qualified." Su Qingjun thought for a while and seemed to agree with White Lotus's words. She said in a low voice, "Well, what you said is not without reason." White Lotus sneered and said, "That's it. Look, there are countless people on Mount Tianlong who could do this, but Lu Chen chose you. I think there's something strange about this." Su Qingjun frowned and seemed to be a little impatient. She said, "I'm also one of the candidates who meets the requirements, and I've known Lu Chen for a long time. He was the first to think of me, so it doesn't count as At the end of her sentence, Su Qingjuan's voice slowly lowered for some reason. After a while, she sighed softly, but her face revealed a somewhat complicated expression. White Lotus sneered and said disapprovingly, "See, you also know in your heart that if it was a normal mission, that man most likely wouldn't have called you. After all, you have so many entanglements in the past, and there's even a life in between." Su Qingjuan's face was a little gloomy. Obviously, she was thinking of the past from this sentence. On the night of the full moon many years ago, Lu Chen, covered in blood, had barged into her home and killed her only brother, her parents' only son, Su Mo, in front of her and her parents. From that moment, from the moment the knife fell, Su Qingju knew that there was a gap between her and the man called Lu Chen, and it was almost impossible to fill. After that day, Lu Chen fled to the ends of the world, and Su Qingjun gradually learned more secrets. She had a complete and clear understanding of what happened that night. But all of this was useless. Even if she knew that Sumo did evil things, knew that he killed EXN for unknown reasons, even if she knew and liked the pure and beautiful girl EXN, but what was the use? All of this could not bypass that layer of bloodline. The murderer was her biological brother, the biological son of her parents. Her parents quickly aged and brooded over this matter. They would probably not forgive him even in death. And she was her parents' child. They raised her and gave her everything. No matter what, she could not betray her parents. So, the only thing she could abandon was her own feelings. After a moment of silence, Su Qingjun raised her head to look at White Lotus and suddenly asked, "White Lotus, what do you mean by saying all these to me? Do you want me to not go back to Kunlun Mountain?" White Lotus was startled. For a moment, she seemed to be at a loss. She said, I didn't mean it like that. Actually, I told you just now, I just felt that Lu Chen's behavior was a little strange this time. It was not like his usual self, so I reminded you. As for whether going back is good or bad, I also can't say for sure." Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she sighed softly and said in a low voice, "Although it may be a little pretentious or ridiculous to say this, but in my heart, I feel that Lu Chen will not harm me." "Do?" White Lotus rolled her eyes. She snorted and said, "I also give up." "All right, even if what you said is right and he will not harm you, then he asked you to leave Immortal City and return to Kunlun Mountain, is it still for your own good? Don't forget that Zhengxian Meng is now strong and prosperous, and Fiyunji is even more like the sun in the sky. This is a great opportunity to make a name for yourself. He suddenly asked you to leave at this time. Is there something wrong with his brain? If not, this city is in danger." Bai Lian's voice suddenly stopped. Afterwards, she furrowed her brows and slowly sat up straight. A thoughtful expression appeared on her face. Su Qingjun, on the other hand, slightly lowered her eyes. Her expression was solemn, and the light in the depths of her eyes flickered slightly. There was a bit of pain, but there was also a bit of hidden joy. Lu Jiji was now the direct disciple of the Lord Perfected Lord. He had reached the sky in one step, but in his heart, he probably still remembered the person from back then, right? And with his identity, if he could feel the thorny danger, then what kind of terrifying situation would it be? Zhengxian Meng was clearly in a good situation. How could such a strange situation happen? Too many doubts rushed into the minds of the two women in the room. Just as they were in a daze, suddenly, there was a knock on the door. White Lotus was shocked at first, then her face showed some dissatisfaction and contempt, and said, "It's probably that person who doesn't agree with his words and actions again?" Su Qingjun suddenly stood up and walked a few steps towards the door. Suddenly, she was startled again. She hurriedly slowed down her steps and calmed her breathing. After letting out a long breath, she then walked forward and opened the door. The light from outside spilled in. A man's figure stood by the door. Su Qingjun took a look and suddenly got a shock. She asked with slight surprise, "Master, why are you here?" White Lotus was originally sneering inside. Hearing that, she was also startled. She walked over to take a look. Sure enough, the person standing outside the door was not Lu Chen. Instead, it was Su Qingjuan's master, Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara's appearance compared to a few years ago, in fact, There was almost no change, including the wine gourd that he carried with him all year round. He seemed to be in good spirits. It should be that he had been living well these few years. He saw his disciple, Su Qingjun, and then he saw White Lotus behind Su Qingjun. Masato Kihara knew that his disciple had taken in White Lotus. However, no one knew that he did not agree at the beginning. It was just that he could not directly dissuade Su Qingjun. At this moment, when he saw White Lotus, there was no joy on his face. He just nodded slightly. However, he was an elder, so White Lotus honestly returned a big bow. Masato Kihara no longer paid attention to White Lotus. He pulled Su Qingjun to the door and then said to Su Qingjun seriously, "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" "You may need to go back to Kunlun Mountain. Something seems to have happened at home." Chapter 557. Su Qingjun's expression suddenly changed and she became nervous. She hastily asked, "Master, what happened? Are my father and mother all right?" Masato Kihara shook her head and said, "The news just came from Fuyunji. It said that a riot has recently occurred in Kanwa City. The cause is still unknown for the time being, but in the end, it caused a lot of trouble. Several aristocratic families in the city were invaded and suffered varying degrees of damage. Among them were the Bai family, the Sun family, the Lu family, the Yi family, and the Su family." Seeing that Su Qingjun's complexion had turned pale and looked worried, Masato Kihara hastily shook her hand and said, "Don't worry. They didn't say anything about casualties. They just mentioned that each family suffered losses. It's very likely that their family's property was damaged. But I know the situation at home, and I also understand that what you're most worried about right now is your parents at home, so I came to tell you." At this point, Masato Kihara paused for a moment and revealed a loving and gentle expression. "If you want to go back, I'll help you ask your martial uncle Tianlan for a favor and let you go back." Su Qingjun's heart was moved and she hastily said, "There's no need, master. I just received a task and have to go back to Kunlun Party. It's best if we can solve the two matters at the same time." Masato Kihara was startled, but she immediately nodded and said, "There's actually such a coincidence. That's good. No matter what happened at home, you should go back and take a look." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Yes, disciple understands. I'll pack my luggage now and go to Fuyunji to explain the situation. I'll go back tomorrow." Masato Kihara then pulled her to the side, carefully exhorted her, and asked if she needed any help. After Su Qingjun said that everything was fine, she smiled and told her that it was rare for her to go back and that there seemed to be nothing urgent in Immortal City recently. If no one urged her, she could stay in Kunlun City and didn't need to rush back. Su Qingjun was a bit hesitant. She glanced at Kunlun Palace Hall and asked in a low voice, "Master, this isn't good, is it?" Masato Kihara secretly sighed in her heart. She asked this question instead of directly refusing and saying that she would come back as soon as possible after finishing her business, which meant that Su Qingjun was still worried about her parents and wanted to stay in Kanwa City to accompany them for a while. She was just too embarrassed to say it before. Who said that there were no close friends in the world? His expression didn't change. He just smiled and said, "It's not a big deal. Didn't I just say that there's nothing serious here? Even if there's something, there are many people here to support it. There's still your master and martial uncle Tian. With these people here, do you think the sky will collapse without you?" Su Qingjun was a bit surprised and said, "Yes." Masato Kihara said again, "You can go back without worry. You don't need to worry about Xianxia. If there's really something that needs you to come back, I'll write to you and explain it. You can come back by yourself then." Su Qingjun looked grateful and nodded. "Yes, thank you, master." Masato Kihara smiled kindly. He looked at Su Qingjun and sighed in his heart. After saying a few more words, he left. Su Qingjun turned around and returned to the room. She saw White Lotus standing on the side with a slight frown. She seemed to be thinking about something. When Su Qingjun walked over, White Lotus cast a glance at her and smiled. However, the smile seemed a bit forced. She said, "Big sister, are you going back?" Su Qingjun said, "Yes. Something happened at home. My parents are old and they don't have a son to take care of them. I'm a bit worried, so I still have to go back and have a look." White Lotus nodded. At this time, she didn't say anything more. She simply said, "Then be careful on your way back. Have a safe journey." Su Qingjun took a deep look at her and said, "I know. Thank you." Masato Kihara left Su Qingjun's house and walked along the road. Soon after, he came to a fork in the road. One side was the main road. Walking forward, he could see the majestic cornice of Fuyunji Hall and Kunlun Hall. The other side was a little smaller. It turned into the depths of the forest. Looking at the direction, it was to the back of the mountain. Masato Kihara looked in the direction of the two halls. He looked calm and indifferent. Then he waved his sleeve and picked up the bottle gourd at his waist. He found a stone on the side of the road and sat down. Then he raised his head and drank to his heart's content. When the wine entered his throat, the fragrance of the wine overflowed. He slightly narrowed his eyes and let out a satisfied sigh. At the same time, there was a flash of light in his eyes. He glanced around in front of and behind him. There was no one nearby. Masato Kihara sat for a while and drank 2 mouthfuls of wine. He was like an old and tired drunkard. Then he slowly stood up and hung the bottle gourd at his waist. He slowly strode forward and walked on the path. The path led into the distance. After entering the forest, the light was a little dim. Masato Kihara walked all the way. His pace seemed slow but was actually fast. Soon he walked near the exit on the other side of the forest. At this moment, a figure suddenly came out from behind a big tree near the edge of the forest. He waved at him. Masato Kihara glanced at him. His expression didn't change. It was as if he had already expected that there would be someone here. He didn't say anything and just walked straight over. In the dim shadow of the tree stood a man who was much younger than him. However, in terms of seniority, he was actually of the same generation as him. His position in the sect and even in Xianxia was probably even higher than him. There weren't many people like this. Lu Chen was one of them. Seeing Masato Kihara coming over, Lu Chen nodded to him as a greeting. Then he asked, "How is it?" Masato Kihara said, "It's fine. She promised to go back and will leave tomorrow." Lu Chen looked relieved and nodded without saying anything. Spiritual Master Moon looked at him and couldn't help but ask, "You were the one who told me about this. Why didn't you tell Qingjun yourself? Instead, you came to me and talked to me for half a day, saying that I still owe you a favor from back then and wanted me to help you?" Lu Chen snorted and said, "Anyway, you probably forgot that favor on purpose. It's useless to talk about other things. Just use it on this." Masato Kihara spat and said angrily, "Nonsense, am I that kind of person?" Lu Chen was too lazy to pay attention to him. He just said, "I mentioned to her about going back to Kunlun Mountain." However, a few days after that, Qingjun didn't respond. Most likely she was still hesitant or didn't dare to fully believe my words. But it's not a big deal. You should be like this. But it's different for you. Among the few people she trusts the most in this world, you should be one of them. Master Muyuan smiled, but subconsciously raised his head to look at the sky. Lu Chen also followed his gaze and looked up. Through the gaps between the branches and leaves of the trees, they could see the clear sky outside. White clouds floated in the blue sky. A breeze blew and the world was quiet. The weather is good. Tell her to leave early. If the weather turns bad, it may be difficult to travel. When you came to find me, did you also feel that something was wrong? I don't know whether it's right or not, but there is such an outstanding disciple behind Tetsu. It doesn't matter if I'm old, but if it's possible, I should at least leave some hope so that I can face the spirits of the ancestors in heaven. Well, she is fortunate to have a master like you. Chapter 558. Deep within the prison of Fuyunji, Lu Chen and Xue Ying stood side by side in the quiet room. There were 5 to 6 people standing behind them. Judging from their attire, they were the elites of Fuyunji. Chen He, who had been instigated by Lu Chen, or rather, forced to side with Fuyunji, was also standing expressionlessly among the crowd. As for Lu Chen's trusted aide, Old Ma, he was also here. However, he was standing at the back of the crowd. His brows were tightly furrowed, as though he had a lot on his mind. Everyone's gaze was looking forward. The room was filled with a thick and unpleasant stench of blood. The place was brightly lit, but most of the time, it did not make one feel happy. Oppression and terror were the main themes of the place. This was the interrogation room of Xianxia. Other than the people here, there were many torture tools. With the reputation of Xianxia, this was a dark place that outsiders did not know about. Perhaps it was because of the fear of reputation that, other than the reliable and trustworthy members of Xianxia's main hall, even the righteous people of Xianxia or the elite disciples of the Kunlun party and other famous factions were not allowed to step into this place. All the people of Xianxia who were standing were silent. However, there were beast-like panting and painful moans in the room. A few people were interrogating a prisoner in the middle of the room. From the messy hair and wounds, one could see the outline of that person's face. It was Fan Te, the devil cult sorcerer who was captured a few days ago. The people at the side did not look like fiends. In fact, most of the time, the faces of these people who were interrogating Fan Te were cold and numb. Perhaps only those who were truly numb to life and pain could work in such a dark and terrifying place. They continued to inflict pain on Fan Te's body expressionlessly. When they reached their limit, the prisoner screamed continuously. His screams suddenly became louder and then suddenly stopped. Then, his head tilted to the side and he fell unconscious. Those people stopped what they were doing and turned to look at Shui Ying and Lu Chen. However, the two of them didn't seem to have any change in their expressions. Instead, the people standing behind them began to stir. Chen He, who was in the crowd, looked toward Fan Te with a complicated gaze. He then glanced at Lu Chen's back, as though he wanted to say something. However, in the end, he pursed his lips tightly and did not say a word. Fan Te had clearly said everything that needed to be said. If he did not say anything in such a situation, it was likely that he had nothing else to say. He could see the situation, and he felt that the people around him could see it as well. There was no need to torture him anymore. However, it was one thing to see it, but it was another to say it out loud. Even though there was a commotion in the crowd around him at the start, no one said a word until now. Hence, the gazes of the people at the front and back all landed on the man and woman, waiting for their decision. Shui Ying didn't say anything, and neither did Lu Chen. It seemed as if they didn't care about this matter at all, causing this awkward silence to persist for a while. It also caused the atmosphere in the room to become inexplicably tense. In the past, there would undoubtedly only be one person who could make the final decision in such a situation. No one had any objections, and the person who should speak would not back down. Xianxia had always been a swift and decisive hall. However, the situation had changed. Was this change good or bad? It was definitely good. Even if there was a little bad, no one would say anything. This was because this was the decision of the high and mighty Lord True Lord. Perhaps there were some people who thought further. True Lord Tianlan had sent his only personal disciple, who was also the future successor of all his businesses, to Xianxia. Even though he was only assisting Shui Ying on the surface, could it be possible that he was dissatisfied with the current situation in Xianxia? What was the old man thinking in his heart? The awkward stalemate continued. The gazes of the two people continued to look forward calmly, as though they were waiting for the people around them to speak. Compared to the silence of the two, the expressions of the people around them started to stiffen. They looked at each other with worried gazes. Even the few executioners at the front with cold expressions looked over in shock. No one knew how much time had passed, but no one cared about the unconscious Fan Te on the ground. Or rather, the people beside him did not know if they should care about him. They were also intimidated by the cold and stiff atmosphere and did not dare to open their mouths. Finally, Shui Ying moved her head slightly. Then, she turned around to look at Lu Chen. Lu Chen also moved his body. He was very polite to this senior of Xianxia. There was even a hint of a smile on his face. "Junior Lu, what do you think we should do next?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "I will leave everything to Hall Master Shui." Shui Ying looked at him and nodded. After a moment of silence, she said, "I think that this person should have told us everything he knows. We will not be able to get anything out of him even if we continue to question him. Hence, I think that we should temporarily detain this person. We will continue to pursue the demon of the devil cult and the missing elder ghost. What do you think? Very good, Luchan said. Shui Ying waved her hand. The people around her immediately heaved a sigh of relief. The atmosphere in the room also became much more relaxed. The few executioners bowed to Shui Ying and Luchan. Then, they hurriedly lifted the unconscious Fan Tue and walked out of the interrogation room. Following that, Shui Ying also led her people toward the door and prepared to leave. However, just as she was about to reach the door, she suddenly heard Lu Chen's voice coming from behind her. He said, Hall Master Shui, actually, there is another matter. Master has asked me once over the past 2 days. He said that even though the situation has been settled and the devil cult has been defeated, the main culprit, Elder Ghost, has yet to be brought to justice. This is a fly in the ointment. He asked me to ask you about when we will be able to capture him. Shui Ying's body suddenly paused. Her footsteps came to a halt. The few experts from the floating cloud division behind her also revealed a subtle expression. The surrounding atmosphere once again became quiet. However, this time, the silence did not last for long. Shui Ying quickly replied, I have already reported this matter to the Lord. Did he not tell you? Luchan shook his head and said, He indeed did not tell him. Shui Ying said, I have already informed the Lord of the entire situation. He knows what to do. Junior brother Lu, is there anything else? Luchan smiled and said, There is nothing else. Take care, Hall Master Shui. Shui Ying nodded and led her people out. Only Lu Chen and Old Ma were left in the room. Old Ma slowly walked over from a corner. He pursed his lips and looked at the empty doorway. He lowered his voice and said to Lu Chen, This person is not to be trifled with. Lu Chen's expression did not change. He said, I know. Old Ma sneered and said, You knew and still went to provoke her? Lu Chen said indifferently, Do you know why she suddenly called me junior brother Lu recently? Old Ma was startled. He frowned and said, It can't be. Lu Chen sneered. His gaze was deep as he looked in the direction of the door. After a while, he said, Let's go. This place is filled with yin qi. I don't know how many ghosts are wandering around here. Chapter 559. Walking out of the prison, when the sun shone on them again, Lu Chen and Old Ma both felt a warm aura, as if they had walked out of the gloomy hell and returned to the lively world. Old Ma sighed and suddenly asked in a low voice, Do you think Senior Immortal knows about the situation in this prison? Lu Chen glanced at him and walked forward. Old Ma followed beside him. After they were a distance away from the prison, Lu Chen said, Why are you asking this? Old Ma shrugged and said, Just asking. Both of us used to work outside, risking our lives on the line. How would we know there is such a place in Fuyunji? Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, I didn't know about it before. I only found out about this place after I went to Sky Dragon Mountain with that damn Baldy to take in disciples. But you are not a kind person. This kind of place will definitely exist. At most, the methods are a little more vicious. He paused as if he thought of something. After hesitating for a moment, he said, Are you afraid that if this matter spreads out, it will ruin his reputation outside? Old Ma said, Although the people here are all devil cult demons, the methods are indeed too cruel. If this really spread out, it will be detrimental to Senior Immortal's reputation. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, Whether that Baldy of mine has been here, or whether he knows that Shui Ying and the others from Fuyunji are torturing the devil cult people here, I don't know. In my opinion, he probably doesn't know, but it's not that he was deceived. I mean, that damn Baldy probably doesn't care to know. Old Ma was startled and asked with some doubt, What do you mean? Lu Chen said indifferently, In my opinion, he probably doesn't care about the life and death of these people, and he can't be bothered to come here. To him, the most important thing is the result. As long as Fuyunji tells him the result of the interrogation, it's fine. As for what happens during the interrogation, he probably doesn't care at all. He glanced at Old Ma and said, Those evil faction, evil people's life and death, suffering, all kinds of horrible scenes where life is worse than death, in my bald-headed Shifu's heart, it doesn't have any weight at all. He won't have any pity for those people, so he probably won't care if these things are spread out or not. Old Ma was silent. After a while, he said, "So, for so long, these things in Fuyunji's prison have never been spread out? It's all thanks to Blood Warbler." Lu Chen said straightforwardly, "Although this woman has a subtle relationship with me now, and we don't get along, but after so many years, she must be the dead Baldy's most loyal subordinate." Speaking of this, he sneered and said, "The dead Baldy's status is too high, and his character is even more arrogant to the point of looking down on everyone. These dirty things naturally have to be done by Blood Warbler and the other Fuyunji people. It's really hard on her, after so many years, she can actually endure the dead Baldy until now." Old Ma pushed him, looked around and snorted, "You talk less." Lu Chen glanced at him from the corner of his eyes and said, "Are you going to snitch?" Old Ma was angry and said angrily, "Do I look like that kind of person to you?" Lu Chen said, "You don't look like that now, but if you were given a mountain of gold, you would look like that kind of person from head to toe." Old Ma spat and snorted at him, then thought for a while and said, "What do you plan to do now? The evil cult's power is gone. It's basically impossible for them to rise again. Without external enemies, why do I feel that Hall Master Shui is starting to target you?" Lu Chen's expression was calm and said, "Don't worry, no matter what happens, as long as I cling on to the dead Baldy's thigh, I will naturally have nothing to worry about." Old Ma was stunned for a moment, and couldn't help but size him up with a strange expression on his face. Lu Chen asked, "Why are you looking at me like this?" Old Ma said, "I remember when we were in Qingshiteng village, you weren't like this. Although the days back then were hard, I remember that you seemed to have a backbone. Even the kindness that Lord Perfected Immortal occasionally passed to you, you didn't even care. Why now?" Lu Chen said, "Can backbone save my life? Can pride give me status? In this huge celestial city, there are so many people who want to climb up. Why should I pretend to be virtuous?" He smiled, his gaze suddenly became a little blurred, but very quickly it became clear again. He smiled bitterly to himself and said softly, "Actually, there are virtuous people, everyone's luck is different, and I think she probably doesn't have so many thoughts, as the saying goes, one who has no desires is upright." Old Ma frowned and said, "Who are you talking about?" Lu Chen smiled and didn't say anything. In the outskirts of Celestial City, Masato Kihara personally sent Su Qingjun here. Looking at the road stretching into the distance, he smiled and stopped in his tracks. Su Qingjun also knew that it was time to part, so she turned to look at Masato Kihara and said softly, "Master, this is enough to send you here, please go back." Masato Kihara nodded and said, "Be careful on the road, when you go back, treat your parents well, they only have you as a daughter, treat them well." Su Qingjun replied with an N, and said, "Disciple understands." After saying that, her gaze subconsciously swept in the direction of the road, but only saw that the road was empty. Occasionally there were a few pedestrians passing by, but they were all unfamiliar faces. There was no familiar figure in her memory. Masato Kihara saw Su Qingjun's expression, and also saw the trace of deliberately hidden in her eyes, but still couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He shook his head slightly, although he knew that there were some things he shouldn't say, but the girl in front of him was his most beloved disciple. In the end he still couldn't help but sigh and said, "Today, other than me, no one else came." How intelligent was Su Qingjun? She immediately heard the hidden meaning in Masato Kihara's words, and her cheeks turned red, saying, "Master, what are you saying?" Kihara said, "Qingjun, there are some things that I shouldn't say, but seeing how you're behaving, let me put it this way. Lu Chen isn't a good match for you, so you shouldn't waste your efforts on him." Su Qingjun was startled, probably because she didn't expect Masato Kihara to directly mention Lu Chen's name, and said it so simply and crudely. She was stunned for a moment. Masato Kihara frowned and said, "Qing, listen to Master, after returning to the mountain, cultivate and recuperate well. With your talent, your future is bound to be boundless. There is no need to get together with him, otherwise, you will only destroy yourself." Su Qingjun was silent for a long time, then nodded and said, "Master, I understand that you are doing this for my own good. In fact, I have already made a decision in my heart. Ever since he killed Sumo, I will never have any relationship with him again. Please rest assured, Master. Masato Kihara smiled, a gratified expression on his face. Su Qingjun bowed and bid farewell, then turned around and set out on the road back home. She looked at the distant mountains, and when there was finally no one around, she sighed softly and said to herself in a low voice, "Everyone, parents, master, and even friends, say that you are not a good person. Luchin, Luchin, what kind of person are you?" Chapter 560. In the Starry Hall, Supreme Guyu sat alone in the main hall, looking up at the strange starry sky map carved on the dome of the main hall. Her expression was slightly complicated, her eyes flickered slightly, and she was silent. At the entrance of the main hall, two children stood by the door and waited. From time to time, they would look back into the main hall, but every time they saw almost the same scene. They then looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. At this moment, footsteps sounded. The two children turned around and saw a middle-aged man in a Taoist robe striding over from outside the starry hall. The two children recognized this person. It was Supreme Guyu's disciple, Feng Zhe, one of the closest disciples of Supreme Guyu. When Feng Zhe came near, the two children came forward to greet him. Feng Zhe nodded and said in a low voice, "Help me inform them." The two children looked at each other with a troubled expression. One of the older children standing on the left said, "Senior brother, Master has instructed us to not let anyone disturb him." Feng Zhe was startled for a moment. He raised his head and glanced at the hall. From afar, he could see the Guyu True Lord in deep thought. He could not help but frown as he asked in a low voice, "How long has Master been inside?" The child on the right said, "It has been more than an hour." Feng Zhe hesitated for a moment, but after a while, as if struggling in his heart, he still made a decision and said, "I have an urgent matter, I must tell Master. This matter concerns Supreme Tai Hu of Heavenly Law Hall. It cannot be delayed. Help me go in and inform him." The two children were taken aback, and then a bitter expression appeared on their faces. However, Feng Zhe's status in the Starry Hall was quite high, and with his serious expression at the moment, the two children did not dare to be negligent. So after hesitating, the two children still walked into the main hall. Feng Zhe looked at them from behind, and saw that the two children walked carefully all the way to Supreme Guyu's side, and then reported in a low voice. Supreme Guyu's face did not show any obvious anger, but after listening for a moment, she turned her head to look at the door. Feng Zhe hurriedly bowed. Supreme Guyu's expression did not change, and after a moment of silence, she softly said to the two children. The two children seemed to be stunned for a moment. Then, they did not dare to say anything else and quickly bowed and left. Feng Zhe had been waiting anxiously for a long time. When the two children finally came out, he greeted them and walked into the hall. However, at this moment, two arms suddenly appeared in front of him. It was the two Taoist children who had reached out in unison to stop him. Feng Zhe was stunned and asked in surprise, "What are you doing?" The two Taoist children had apologetic expressions on their faces, but their expressions were resolute. They said softly, "Senior brother Feng Zhe, please wait here for a moment. Master is currently studying the star atlas and shouldn't be distracted." Feng Zhe was stunned for a moment and did not react for a moment. After a while, he said in astonishment, "Did you not mention to teacher that I have an important matter regarding immortal Tiehu?" The Tao child sighed and said, "I did, Senior brother Feng Zhe, but Master told me to do so. You should wait a little longer." Feng Zhe was speechless. He could not help but look into the hall again, only to see that immortal Guyu had returned to her original appearance of looking at the dome of the star atlas. She did not even glance over here. Feng Zhe was speechless and felt a little uneasy. He secretly recalled his actions in the past few days and thought that he was still as respectful to Master as usual. It seemed that he did not offend Master in any way. What was going on? However, since Immortal Guyu had asked the Taoist child to pass this message, no matter what the purpose was, and whether there was any misunderstanding in between, Feng Zhe couldn't ask for more. He couldn't even leave at will now because his master Immortal Guyu had asked him to wait here. Feng Zhe silently retreated and nodded to the two Taoist children. He stood under a pillar at the side of the hall entrance and frowned at the same time. After a while, he who was full of doubts suddenly thought of something. Could it be that Master's reaction was related to his purpose of coming? He had never heard of any enmity between him and Immortal Tiao. Could it be that he had suddenly committed a taboo? Feng Zhe's body trembled. He could not help but reach out and wipe his forehead. It was actually a little wet. At the same time, a similar scene of subordinates paying their respects to the true monarch also occurred in the Kunlun Palace on the other side of the Celestial Dragon Mountain. The only difference was that the true monarch Tianlan, who was usually even more arrogant than the true monarch Guyu, didn't reject people outside the palace like the true monarch Guyu did. Instead, he allowed Shui Ying of the Floating Clouds office to speak with him. That oxen was lying lazily on one side and sleeping. Immortal Tianlan was sitting not far from oxen with a calm expression. He looked at the beautiful and charming woman who was kneeling on the ground not far in front of him. His eyes were as deep as the unfathomable sea, with faint waves rising and falling. Shui Ying, on the other hand, was kneeling on the ground and did not even raise her head. She only opened her mouth and said, "It is subordinates' incompetence that has troubled you." Immortal Tianlan looked at her quietly. After a while, he said, "You don't have to explain so much to me. Elder Gue is a cunning and treacherous person. It is understandable that you could not catch him. I do not blame you." Shui Ying kowtowed and said, "Thank you for your understanding. It's just that junior brother Lu Chen asked me about this matter. I am afraid that I have delayed Immortal's important matter. So I have come to ask for forgiveness." Immortal Tianlan's eyes slightly drooped. There was a slight chill in his eyes, but it was gone in a flash. He said, "You have led Fuyunji for many years. You are powerful and meritorious." Only then did Shui Ying let out a sigh of relief. When Immortal Tianlan asked her to stand up, she climbed up from the ground and stood to the side. Immortal Tianlan looked at her and thought for a while. He said, "Lu Chen is still young. He has not done well in some things. You have to give him more guidance." Shui Ying hurriedly said, "Not at all. Junior brother Lu Chen is extremely intelligent and resolute. Even if he has a few flaws, they do not cover up his brilliance. It's not a big deal." Immortal Tianlan narrowed his eyes and did not say anything more. He said, "After you go out later, send someone to find Lu Chen and ask him to come see me." Hearing this, Shui Ying pursed her lips. She could not help but glance at Immortal Tianlan from the corner of her eyes. However, she saw that this lord's expression was cold and seemed to be a little angry. She immediately retracted her gaze and said respectfully, "Yes, I will send someone to find junior brother Lu Chen right now. I heard that he is on good terms with Su Qingjun of the Kunlun Party. Today, Su Qingjun has left the city to return to Kunlun Mountain. I wonder if he will send her off. I'll go look for him." Immortal Tianlan did not say anything. Shui Ying did not dare to say anything else either. She bowed and walked out. When she was about to reach the door, Immortal Tianlan's voice suddenly sounded from behind. He said, "Even though there are many difficulties, we still have to capture Elder Gue. You have followed me for so many years. You should know that I don't care about the process most of the time. I only care about the results." Shui Ying's heart skipped a beat. She nodded in agreement and left quickly. Immortal Tianlan's expression gradually turned cold as he watched Shui Ying leave. Chapter 561. The news of Supreme Guyu attacking his disciple, Feng Zhe, was not known to the outside world for the time being, but it had begun to slowly spread within the Starry Hall. This news surprised many people and they discussed it in private, but no one would stand up for him, because Feng Zhe was still punished to kneel outside the Starry Hall to beg for forgiveness. This matter actually happened not too long ago, and the outside world did not know about it because it was still a short time, and the news had not spread yet. However, for Fuyunji, which valued all kinds of information the most in Xianxia, and almost everywhere, they still got the news very quickly. In the past, such secret information involving the level of deity transformation was also a taboo in Fuyunji. Generally, when intelligence was handed over, it would only be passed to two people in the end. One was, of course, Supreme Tianlan, and the other was Xue Ying, who was in charge of Fuyunji. However, at present, after Supreme Tianlan personally confirmed it, there was one more person who could see the highest secret information, and that was Lu Qin. At this moment, Lu Qin received such a sealed envelope that was delivered by a special person. Before this, Old Ma was accompanying him to talk about something. After seeing the appearance of the letter, which basically had no extra traces on the surface, but the envelope was khaki and looked very old-fashioned, the expression on Old Ma's face immediately became serious. He took a few steps back and kept a distance from Lu Qin. Lu Qin glanced at Old Ma and nodded slightly. Without more hesitation, he directly tore open the seal and took out the letter to read. Old Ma looked at him from the side and saw that Lu Qin's face was calm. His eyes swept over the letter slightly, and from beginning to end, there was no change in his expression. After reading in silence, Lu Qin silently put the letter back into the envelope and held it in his hand. After a moment of silence, suddenly a flame rose from his hand and ignited the letter. Then it burned quickly, and soon the letter was burned to ashes. The ashes were blown by the wind, and suddenly flew into the sky and scattered on the ground, becoming part of the dust and soil, and could no longer be found. "Let's go," Lu Qin said to Old Ma. Old Ma nodded and walked over, walking side by side with Lu Qin, but from beginning to end he did not ask a word. After walking for a while, Lu Qin suddenly asked Old Ma, "Are you familiar with the situation at Starry Hall?" Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "I know a little. What do you want to ask?" Lu Qin pondered for a moment and said, "Just tell me casually. Although I have learned a little before, after all, I haven't been back for a long time, and most of my energy is in Fuyunji. There are many things that I can't take care of at the moment." Of course, it was not a whim of Lu Qin to suddenly ask about the situation at Starry Hall. Old Ma understood in his heart that most of the news in the secret letter was related to Starry Hall, and according to the level of the secret letter, it must also involve the news of Immortal Guyu of Starry Hall. Those who had managed to survive in the Floating Clouds office to this day were not fools. Most of them were smart people. Old Ma quickly understood this matter. Then he thought about it on a deeper level. If he could think of this, how could Lu Qin not think of it? But Lu Qin still asked him very calmly. In fact, this was tantamount to telling him something tactfully, and it was also tantamount to expressing trust in him from another perspective. Old Ma bowed his head slightly, and there was some warmth in his heart. Then he decided to say everything he knew. Starry Hall has always been in a relatively detached position in the eyes of the major halls in Xianxia. In terms of strength and influence, the Starry Hall has never been prominent. Not to mention our Floating Clouds department, which is like the sun at high noon, even compared to the Heavenly Law Hall and the Great Chancellor Courtyard, their prestige is still much smaller. However, after all, there is still Immortal Guyu of Soul Formation in Starry Hall, and the other 5 immortals are also very respectful to Immortal Guyu. So, although Starry Hall does not fight for big things, they also have a share in small things and some benefits that should be there. Their days are still quite good. Lu Qin nodded slightly and did not speak. Old Ma's words just now were actually relatively tactful, but for him who had begun to gradually understand the actual situation of Xianxia, he had already understood it after listening. The meaning of this sentence was that I have my own Starry Hall, and it doesn't matter if the rest of you want to dominate the mountains and silver seas. I will honestly watch and not block your path, but you have to give me, a Immortal Guyu of Soul Formation, some face. After all, I am also known as one of the top 6 figures. There should be some benefits, right? So there was. It was really good for everyone, and it was best for everyone to have benefits. It was best for everyone that Xianxia could become more and more prosperous. Only a madman would break such a good thing. Was there such a madman who stood at the top in this world but went crazy? Well, there shouldn't be. Lu Qin shook his head slightly and smiled bitterly in his heart, but he did not show it on his face. He said to Old Ma, "I heard that Immortal Guyu has several disciples. Usually, he only oversees the overall situation, but generally does not care about the trivial things under him?" Old Ma nodded and said, That's right. Immortal Gu Yu has 5 disciples, all named with the word Feng. They usually work for him. Most of the time, it is enough for the 5 of them to appear in front of the Starry Hall. So in private, some people also jokingly call them the 5 guardian deities of the Starry Hall. Speaking of this, Old Ma laughed and said, "But there is another interesting thing, that is, Immortal Gu Yu usually has a detached attitude in the Immortal Alliance, but many times in the Immortal Alliance, there is a need to choose a side for the interests and various disputes in the Immortal Alliance. Although the 5 disciples have the same master, their positions and attitudes are very different when dealing with affairs. They are more inclined, which is also a scenery of our Sky Dragon Mountain." Lu Chen's eyes flashed slightly and said, "What do you mean?" Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "I heard that the 5 outstanding disciples of Immortal Gu Yu are actually in contact with other big mountain factions in private. Of course, there is no evidence for this, it is just speculation by others. But generally speaking, Immortal Gu Yu's eldest disciple, Feng Zhe, is said to be inclined to the side of Heavenly Law Hall's Immortal Tai Hu, because his Taoist companion is a Jin Dan female cultivator from Heavenly Law Hall. The second disciple, Feng Hen, is usually very close to our Fuyunji. The third disciple, Feng Wu, likes to interact with people from Dazai Yuan. And the 4th and 5th disciples are also close to people from Golden Dragon Immortal and Luyun Immortal's side respectively." Lu Chen stopped his footsteps when he heard this. His face revealed a look of surprise and said in astonishment, "So obvious? Doesn't Immortal Gu Yu care about these disciples?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "Who knows, that is what everyone says. Maybe Immortal Gu Yu has the pearl of wisdom in his hands and is too lazy to care about these small things." Lu Chen pondered for a moment and asked, "Then usually, which disciple does Immortal Gu Yu trust the most?" Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "I heard that the eldest disciple, Feng Zhe, is the most talented and capable. Immortal Gu Yu likes him the most." Lu Chen let out a sound and suddenly laughed, his face revealing a meaningful smile. Chapter 562. What do you mean? Looking at you, there seems to be something I don't know. Old Ma looked at Lu Chen and asked with a smile. Lu Chen waved his hand. He was about to speak but quickly shut his mouth. After a moment of silence, he changed the topic and said, "You just said that Gu Yu Perfected's second disciple Feng Hen is close to our Fuyunji side. Is he also married to someone like the eldest disciple Feng Zhe?" Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "I haven't heard of this. In fact, although Feng Zhe's Taoist companion is a female cultivator from the Heavenly Law Hall, she doesn't usually do anything excessive. After all, Feng Zhe is the disciple of a Huashan perfected. It's just that with this layer of relationship, once there is something related to interests, Feng Zhe will naturally be biased towards the Heavenly Law Hall. This is also human nature." Speaking of this, Old Ma smiled and said, "But this is too much, and it is easy to be criticized. Look at the second disciple Feng Hen over there, he has nothing to do with our Fuyunji. Our means are still more clever." "Clever my ass." Lu Chen sneered and said, "Since you said it so directly, he is on our side. Obviously, the outside world probably thinks so too. In this case, what's the use of talking nonsense without clear evidence? Do you think that Gu Yu Perfected, a high and mighty Huashan Perfected, will care if you have evidence or not? There are many things in this world that need to be reasonable, and this is also the use of the so-called justice of heaven. However, there are also some people who are too powerful, such as Tianlan and Gu Yu. Generally speaking, if there is no evidence, then there is no evidence. It's just that he doesn't like you. If he really didn't like you, he could still kill you without any evidence. Even if he didn't do it because he had some scruples and didn't do it, it was definitely not because he was worried about something like reason or evidence. Instead, he felt that there would be all kinds of chain reactions after he did it. For example, his subordinates would become disloyal, worried, afraid, or have greater achievements to consider. What made them endure it was the most important thing. Of course, Old Ma also understood this, so he was a little embarrassed when he was ridiculed by Lu Chen. He smiled bitterly and said, "In fact, it's not necessarily true that he colluded with Fuyunji. It's nothing more than that he is biased towards us on some matters. To be honest, with Fuyunji's current reputation and the Starry Temple's recent achievements, we really don't need to curry favor with them. This was the truth, so Lu Chen nodded and admitted it. However, as long as he thought about the rumor that Guyu Perfected had accepted 5 disciples who actually colluded with the other 5 mountain forces of Xianxia Meng, it was really an incredible thing. Moreover, apart from the Starry Temple, the other great deity perfected subordinates had never encountered such a situation. Lu Chen's heart moved slightly, but he thought to himself that no one who could set foot in the Huashan realm was stupid. All of them were smart people. Even if they were not that shocking perverted lunatic like the damn Baldy, Lu Chen would not believe that any Huashan realm perfected was not scheming enough. That Guyu Perfected could actually tolerate such a mess of his disciples, and could also tolerate the existence of such rumors that were actually a slap in his face. He always felt that it was unusual and seemed to have a deeper meaning. While thinking, Lu Chen suddenly heard old Ma's question from the side, "What's the matter?" Lu Chen was startled and turned to look, only to see that old Ma had unknowingly taken 2 steps forward and stood in front of him, looking at a man walking on the road in front of him. Lu Chen glanced at the man and found that it was also a familiar face, but it was one of Shui Ying's trusted subordinates that he had seen in Fuyunji before. The man walked closer, his expression was calm, first bowed to Lu Chen, then said, "My hall master ordered me to find young master Lu Chen, and to pass a message that the Lord Perfected wants to see you. Please go to the Kunlun Temple as soon as possible." Old Ma turned to look at Lu Chen. Lu Chen also had a surprised expression on his face, but he quickly calmed down, nodded and said, "Okay, I will go immediately." The man smiled, bowed again, and went straight away. From beginning to end, he was polite, but in the eyes of Lu Chen and old Ma, there was a sense of alienation from him. After waiting for a while, when the man walked far away, Lu Chen suddenly said, "That man just now didn't like me, did he?" Old Ma rolled his eyes and said snappily, "How would I know? He was so polite to you, it's good enough. Look, he probably didn't even look at me." Lu Chen laughed, walked over and patted old Ma's shoulder, and the two turned and began to walk in the direction of the Kunlun Temple. There were some things that old Ma didn't say, and neither did Lu Chen, but they both understood. For the floating clouds division that was currently like the midday sun, the two of them could actually be considered lucky people. They were people who had suddenly soared up from the bottom of the hierarchy. Of course, there was also a difference between the two of them. After all, Lu Chen was chosen by perfected Lord Tianlan, and he was publicly accepted as a disciple. In the Fuyunji system, perfected Lord Tianlan had supreme authority, and everyone had to look up to him, so Lu Chen was forced to be respected. However, old Ma was different. He had no identity, no background, and his cultivation was not high. He had been in Fuyunji for many years, but he had never been famous, even though he had to live incognito to protect the secret of the shadow, Lu Chen. Nowadays, in the eyes of many people, old Ma relied on Lu Chen to climb up from a nobody. He had no ability and no credit, and he was always a follower of Lu Chen, enjoying a good life, but his status was still extremely high. It should be known that Lu Chen had a chance to inherit the entire foundation of perfected Lord Tianlan in the future, so the trusted follower of him was very unpleasant to the eyes. Lu Chen did not speak again, and old Ma did not complain anymore. They just walked forward together. Many years ago, when they were still in Qingshitang village, they looked like old friends who had a deep friendship and often joked with each other. However, on this day, as they walked together, old Ma had unknowingly become someone who was one step behind Lu Chen. They were silent, and no one spoke for a long time. They no longer looked like friends, but more like a boss and a subordinate. Or, to put it more bluntly and harshly, like a master and a servant. When did this happen, and when did it become like this? They walked in silence all the way, and finally, they reached the majestic Kunlun Hall. Lu Chen stopped, and old Ma quickly stopped behind him. Lu Chen did not turn back, but when he looked at the majestic hall in front of him, he suddenly said, "Someone is making things difficult for you?" "Not yet," said old Ma. "You sound like you're a little worried?" Old Ma said, "I'm not just worried, I'm scared to death." Lu Chen's body trembled slightly, and he finally turned back to look at him. Old Ma sighed and said, "I always feel that I can only be at ease when I'm with you every day. Other times, I don't even dare to sleep." The muscles on Lu Chen's face twitched slightly. Chapter 563. Has it already reached such a stage? Lu Chen asked Old Ma. Old Ma said, "Maybe I'm thinking too much. After all, nothing has happened, and no one really hurt me. But if it's possible, why don't I leave Immortal City for a period of time?" Lu Chen was startled. He looked at Old Ma and said, "You want to leave too?" Old Ma scratched his head and said, "I'm just going out to relax and get some fresh air. I'll be back after a while." Lu Chen stared at him for a long time. He suddenly sighed and said, "Looks like you really haven't slept well for a long time." Old Ma's smile was gone. He just shrugged and said, "It's good that you know." Lu Chen thought about it and said, "I don't object to you leaving. But I'll say it again. Since we've entered the Immortal City's Vanity Fair and under the influence of power, some things are not up to us to decide. Now that everyone knows that you're my man, and the most trusted one at that, if you leave Immortal City rashly, you'll naturally be targeted. There will also be people who suspect that you're not avoiding trouble, but that I've sent you to do some secret things." Old Ma's face looked a little bitter. Lu Chen said again, "You're also an old man in Fiyunji. I won't say these words, but I'm sure you know in your heart. With Fiyunji's power, once you're targeted by them, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult for you to leave Immortal City and live a carefree life." Old Ma gritted his teeth. He probably weighed the pros and cons in his heart. Then he revealed a dejected expression and said, "I think I probably can't escape unless someone asks." When he said this, he stopped himself. His face revealed some apprehension as he glanced at Lu Chen. Lu Chen understood his meaning in that glance. He understood in his heart, but he did not feel too happy. His face still looked very calm, perhaps even a little dull. The person who could speak was not Lu Chen. Lu Chen knew this very well. He knew that he could not control Fiyunji. Of course, he could not order Fiyunji to let Old Ma go. Out of all the living beings in the world, only one person could do this. Both he and Old Ma knew who this person was. Both Old Ma and he knew very well who could speak in front of that person. He just stood there quietly and looked at him for a while, then nodded and said softly, "Wait here for a while, I'll go in and talk to that damn Baldy." After that, he turned around and strode towards the Kunlun Temple. Old Ma stood where he was, watching Lu Chen's back as he gradually walked further and further away. Suddenly, he felt an inexplicable sense of desolation in his heart. He bowed his head slightly, then sighed. There were thousands of people in the world, and everyone's fate was different. Perhaps some people were born perfect and would have a good life, but some people were unlucky, born lonely, and would always encounter all kinds of misfortunes. What kind of person would you be? Would you feel lonely occasionally? If in this long life, those who know familiar and important people, they will sooner or later leave, leaving you alone, then how will you feel? But no matter what, probably, maybe, we would not say it, pretend to be calm, pretend to face life calmly. When Lu Chen walked into the temple, he felt a sense of loss. It was not until Old Ma's hesitant words that he suddenly realized that he only had one friend left by his side. And now, that person seemed to be about to leave. He looked up and caught sight of perfected Lord Tunlun. That burly man had a handsome and resolute face and a big bald head that was incompatible with the image of the world's experts, but it did not weaken his power at all. He just sat there quietly. He did not sit on the high lotus throne, nor did he sit on those spacious, comfortable and majestic big chairs with backrests. He sat cross-legged on the ground, his loose robe hanging down, like a god sitting peacefully in the mortal world, like a mountain overlooking the human world. There was no one around him. In the towering and magnificent temple, there was actually no one who could accompany him. It was empty and silent. Looking at this damn bald head, Lu Chen suddenly felt that he also seemed a little lonely for a moment. Perfected Lord Tianlan originally sat there quietly with his eyes fixed on an unknown place, as if he was daydreaming. However, when Lu Chen walked in, he seemed to wake up in an instant. His eyes swept to the entrance of the temple, And then he revealed a smile that Lu Chen was familiar with. He waved at him from afar and said, "Come here." Whenever there was an important occasion or when there were outsiders present, Lu Chen and perfected Lord Tianlan would be very well-behaved and well-behaved. However, when there was no one around and the two of them were alone, Lu Chen would often become very casual, and perfected Lord Tianlan did not seem to care about it. He had always liked and even indulged his disciple, Lu Chen. There were times when many of his subordinates were puzzled by this love and affection. Some even found it hard to believe, such as Blood Warbler, Fu Yunxi, and even Old Ma. And perhaps Lu Chen himself. Lu Chen walked straight to perfected Lord Tianlan and did not stop until he was a few feet away from him. Smiling, perfected Lord Tianlan pointed to the ground and said gently, "Sit down." Looking at his body, Lu Chen suddenly had a somewhat nasty guess. He thought, could it be that this damn bald head is too fat and heavy, and the chair will collapse if he sits on it? That's why he likes to sit on the ground. Of course, this idea was simply nonsense and not worth refuting. Even Lu Chen did not believe it at all. As a dignified perfected lord of the divine transformation realm, there was nothing he couldn't do. Why would he have such concerns? However, Lu Chen seemed to have some irrepressible impulse or an inexplicable feeling in his heart today. He just liked to think this way. Of course, on the surface, he still sat down very calmly. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. When he was about to say something, he glanced at Lu Chen's calm face and suddenly paused. Then, a trace of surprise flashed across his face, but he changed his tone and asked, "What's wrong? You seem to be in a bad mood today?" Although Lu Chen had long known that the damned Baldy was omnipotent and almost omnipotent, he still felt as if he could see through people's minds with just a glance. Lu Chen still felt his heart churning. Then he suddenly felt a little annoyed. Instead of answering perfected Lord Tianlan's question, he frowned and asked, "Hey, can I ask you something?" Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his eyebrows, but with some curiosity and a faint smile, he said indifferently, "Sure, go ahead." Just as he straightened his back and sorted out his emotions, ready to answer his closest disciple, who was also his most rebellious person, and what kind of strange, inexplicable, or even earth-shattering question he heard Lu Chen say, "How have you been recently?" Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment. At that moment, his mood was very complicated. It should be noted that he had been prepared to face difficulties and even thought about how he should respond when Lu Chen asked all kinds of tricky and difficult questions and even his deepest secrets. However, he did not expect that he would hear such an ordinary question. "How have you been recently?" Perfected Lord Tianlan snorted and looked a little displeased. But suddenly his eyes flickered. How could he be so easily fooled given his intellect, his unparalleled wisdom, and his astounding talent and strategy? How could this question be so simple? Perfected Lord Tianlan calmed down and thought about it carefully. Then, he asked Lu Chen cautiously, "What did you mean by the standard of living well?" Lu Chen was speechless and dumbfounded. Chapter 564. It took Lu Chen quite a while to calm himself down. Then, he carefully considered his words. In the end, he said to perfected Lord Tianlan with some uncertainty and a bit of a probing tone, "Perhaps, you're having a good time recently? Do you feel very happy?" Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment. Then, he realized that he had probably overreacted. This rebellious disciple of his did not seem to have any weird thoughts just now. Instead, he had asked the most ordinary question. He had thought too much. The atmosphere was a little awkward. However, there was a saying that true experts did not have awkwardness. Even if they did, they could throw it to others. Therefore, perfected Lord Tianlan said very calmly, "Oh, that should be okay." "Okay? You mean that you're having a good time and are very happy?" Lu Chen actually asked again. Perfected Lord Tianlan was a little impatient. However, he always seemed to have a special endurance when facing Lu Chen. Therefore, he actually thought about it again. As a result, he actually thought about it for quite a while, and a look of hesitation appeared on his face. After a while, he frowned and said to Lu Chen seriously, "I didn't think so at first. However, now that you've asked me this question, I think I really don't feel that kind of especially comfortable and happy feeling. Perhaps I'm just living my life peacefully. He nodded and said to Lu Chen, "It seems that I'm not having a good time." Lu Chen rolled his eyes. The indescribable anger that had been surging in his heart suddenly disappeared at this moment. He only felt a little helpless. Shaking his head, he sighed and said, "Forget it, I won't talk about it anymore. Why did you call me here?" Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him with interest. "Well, I did call you here because I have something important to tell you." Lu Chen's expression turned serious. He also sat up a little straighter and his expression became serious. Unexpectedly, Perfected Lord Tianlan continued, "But let's put that aside first. Tell me, why did you suddenly come in and ask that question?" Lu Chen was stunned. "Didn't you say that you had something important to tell me?" If it's urgent, then why didn't you say it? You actually asked me that boring question just now?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said disapprovingly, "No matter how important it is, I can handle it. What's there to be afraid of? Come. I see that you are a little strange today. You are very different from your usual self. This is very rare. Tell me about it." Towards the end, he seemed to be overflowing with interest. Looking at the damn baldy in front of him, Lu Chen suddenly had a strange feeling of absurdity. Could it be that this damn baldy really also felt lonely? Thinking back, he was usually so high and mighty that it was impossible for anyone to get close to him. Only he, who had always been rebellious, could casually say a few words to him. Lu Chen didn't think about it anymore. After a moment of silence, he said, "It's nothing. I just feel that life has been boring recently. Sometimes I don't even have someone to talk to. Maybe I feel lonely?" Perfected Lord Tianlan glared at Lu Chen, causing Lu Chen to feel goosebumps. He could not help but ask angrily, "What are you staring at me for?" Suddenly, Perfected Lord Tianlan burst into laughter and pointed at him. "To think that you would have such a melancholic moment. What a joke, what a joke." Lu Chen rolled his eyes. He couldn't be bothered to argue, so he didn't say a word. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed for a while before smiling at Lu Chen. "Don't talk nonsense. Back then, you hid in a fiend cult for 10 years. Back then, was there anyone who could tell you the truth? Didn't you still survive just like that?" Lu Chen thought for a moment. "You're right." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. "Right." Lu Chen replied, "It's probably because I've experienced it that I'm especially afraid of living those days again." Perfected Lord Tianlan's smile faded slightly. A moment later, he asked softly, "Are you still blaming me?" Lu Chen shook his head. "No, I'm just expressing my feelings. I don't dare to say it in front of others, but I'm just complaining in front of you. Is that all right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. It's fine. Lu Chen sighed. "These days are unbearable. It's as though I'm always seeing people leaving and dying. By the way, damned baldy, you're often alone as well. Have you ever felt lonely?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and shook his head. Just as he was about to reply, he froze all of a sudden and fell silent. For a moment, he was speechless. Lu Chen sensed something and looked up in surprise. He saw that the smile on Perfected Lord Tianlan's face was gone, and he gradually regained his original solemn expression. He was like a god and did not seem to have the emotions and desires of a human. Was he lonely? Apart from himself, no one knew the answer to that question because he was the only one who could experience that feeling. Therefore, if Perfected Lord Tianlan did not say anything, Lu Chen would not understand how he felt. Even though he had many guesses from Perfected Lord Tianlan's expressions and actions, they were ultimately just guesses. However, for some reason, Lu Chen suddenly felt that this damned baldy was more pleasing to the eye. When Perfected Lord Tianlan retracted his smile and was solemn, he was rather dignified and everyone on Sky Dragon Mountain respected him. However, when he saw Lu Chen looking at him with a strange expression, he frowned. Then, he suddenly said with some dissatisfaction, "What are you looking at with shifty eyes?" Lu Chen said, "Is it wrong for me to look at you and listen to you?" Perfected Lord Tianlan scoffed. "I'm a soul formation perfected lord. Is it wrong for me to say that you're wrong?" Lu Chen was stunned for a while before nodding. You're right, it's all my fault. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him and the serious expression on his face suddenly disappeared. He laughed and slapped his knee. You're quite sensible. Lu Chen rolled his eyes, and then he sighed and said, all right, the two of us have some status on Heavenly Dragon Mountain at any rate. What exactly do you want to talk to me about after we've wasted so much time talking nonsense? Perfected Lord Tianlan scoffed. You're the one who started all this nonsense. However, this is good. I'm in a good mood after talking about it. I feel like I'm living a happy life now. Lu Chen was speechless. He thought that no one would expect such a perfected Lord Tianlan to be like this. However, seeing that the damn baldy was just sitting there happily without any intention to continue talking, Lu Chen could only remind him to talk about business again. Perfected Lord Tianlan replied with an "oh," as if he was reminded of that matter. He said casually, I called you here to ask you, what have you been doing recently? Lu Chen said, I didn't do much. The devil cult's side is basically fine. Only Elder Ghost escaped, so I helped Shui Ying chase after him. Don't bother about that matter. Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly interrupted him. Don't interfere in this matter in the future. Leave it to Shuang. Lu Chen was stunned. It was not that he was reluctant to give up that bit of power, but he was surprised that Perfected Lord Tianlan was so resolute. After a pause, he did not ask for the reason and agreed immediately. All right. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression relaxed when he saw Lu Chen's reaction. He smiled and nodded. All right, that's all. You can go now. Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. That's all? Yes, that's all. That's all. Lu Chen said. All right, but I still have something to tell you. Chapter 565. What's the matter? Perfected Lord Tianlan asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, There's still some trouble in the Western land. I want old Ma to go there. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and looked at Lu Chen without saying anything, but his eyes were deep and sharp as if he wanted to see through Lu Chen's mind. Lu Chen didn't intend to avoid his eyes and just met his eyes. After a while, Perfected Lord Tan suddenly snorted and said, No. Lu Chen was slightly surprised. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but then stopped. In the end, he just nodded without saying anything, and there was no shame or anger on his face after his request was rejected. When Lu Chen walked out of the Kunlun Palace, the moment he stepped out of the door, his originally calm face was replaced by a heavy graveness, as if he had a lot on his mind. Old Ma, who had been waiting outside, came to greet him. First, he carefully looked at Lu Chen's expression, and his heart skipped a beat. Then, he looked at the magnificent palace behind Lu Chen and asked in a low voice, How is it? Lu Chen shook his head slightly and didn't answer. He only said softly, Let's walk and talk. Old Ma was stunned and nodded in agreement. Then, he followed Lu Chen and left the Kunlun Palace. After walking for more than 100 feet, Lu Chen stopped and said to Old Ma, You can't leave without my agreement. Old Ma looked disappointed, but he didn't look particularly surprised. Maybe he already knew it. But even so, he still sighed and muttered a sentence. Lu Chen didn't hear him clearly and didn't know if he was complaining. After a while, Old Ma gradually calmed down and asked Lu Chen with a frown, Why? Lu Chen shook his head and said, No reason. He didn't explain. He just said no directly. Old Ma smiled bitterly and said, Then forget it. Nothing will happen here in the Immortal City. Even if the sky falls, there are so many people on Mount Tianlong to support it. Lu Chen laughed and patted his old friend's shoulder, saying, You're right. Don't be afraid. If something really happens, there are people more unfortunate than you. Old Ma shrugged and didn't seem to take Lu Chen's words to heart. He looked around casually and suddenly changed the topic, saying, By the way, why didn't I see Atsu today? Isn't it always with you? Lu Chen said with an "oh," and said, Didn't the oxen on Kunlun Mountain also come here? Recently, Atsu often follows it when it has nothing to do. I don't know where it is now. The atmosphere on the mountain recently feels a little strange. An aged but calm voice floated in the quiet room. That hand that already seemed a bit withered was currently placed on a smooth, spotlessly white and exquisite woman's back, gently caressing it. Song Wenji turned sideways and faced the inside of the wall. The flush on her face had mostly faded, and the remaining blush was like two groups of rouge smeared on her charming and beautiful cheeks, exuding a breathtaking temptation. But she seemed to have no intention of showing this beauty to others. She was only pretending to be tired and quietly looking at the cold and hard wall in front of her. At this time, her face revealed a rare trace of coldness. The old hand touched her bare shoulder and gently rubbed it. It was like a piece of hard and rough sandpaper, making Song Wenji's whole body tremble slightly. Her heart felt numb, and a trace of deep and dark disgust flashed across the depths of her eyes. The hand suddenly stopped, and then the voice paused for a moment. Then, with a trace of concern, he asked her, "What's wrong?" The coldness on Song Wenji's face vanished in an instant and was replaced by a languid coquettishness with a little shyness. She gently turned over and smiled like a blooming spring flower, beautiful beyond words. She said, "I'm fine, foster father." Of course, the person behind her was Immortal Tiehu from the Hall of Heavenly Law. With some affection, he gently stroked Song Wenji's beautiful hair. His face showed a gratified expression and said, "It's good that you're fine." Song Wenji smiled and said, "I was distracted just now." "Ifu, what did you say just now?" Immortal Tiehu said, "I said that recently, I feel that the atmosphere here on the mountain is a little strange. I always feel that something is going to happen." He hesitated for a moment and said, "Oh yes, I heard that in the Starry Hall, Feng Zhe was scolded and punished by that old man Guyu and has been kneeling outside the hall for a few days?" Song Wenji nodded and said, "It's true. I also heard about it and specially sent people to inquire about it in private. But now everyone in the Starry Hall says that Feng Zhe, for some reason, suddenly angered Immortal Guyu and was then punished severely by Immortal Guyu. He did not care about senior brother Feng Zhe's face at all. You should know that senior brother Feng Zhe is the eldest disciple of Immortal Guyu and is usually the most valued. Everyone thinks that he is the most promising person to inherit Immortal Guyu's mantle." Immortal Tiehu snorted and said, "It's hard to say whether he can become Guyu's true disciple and take over the foundation of the Starry Hall. But with old Guyu suddenly doing this, it's hard to say whether he is targeting our Heavenly Law Hall." Song Wenji frowned and said, "It can't be." Immortal Tiehu thought for a while and seemed to have no clue, so he changed the topic and said, "That kid from the Kunlun party called has there been any progress recently?" Song Wenji's eyes flashed and said, "That person is in a hurry and kept asking me to make arrangements. He wants to meet you personally." Immortal Tiehu sneered and said, "Have you checked his background? Is there anything suspicious?" Song Wenji quickly nodded and said, "I have. This He is indeed a direct disciple of the Kunlun party and is also one of the most outstanding people in the younger generation of the Kunlun party in the past few years. But a few years ago, after the chaos of the full moon in the Kunlun party, his teacher Dekan Jinren died accidentally. Although he quickly went to Immortal Tianlan's side, I heard that he spared no effort in doing things for Immortal Tianlan. But until now, I haven't heard that Immortal Tianlan really has the intention to promote him." Immortal Tiehu sneered and said, "He's just a clown. What kind of person is Tianlan? Why would he like him?" Song Wenji raised her eyebrows slightly. "Then, foster father, are you saying that he's depressed because he can't get what he wants? That's why he's secretly relying on us?" Immortal Tiehu thought for a moment and said, "It has been difficult for us to get a nail in Fuyunji and the Kunlun party. Although we can't completely trust He this time, it is a rare opportunity after all. How about this?" He suddenly sat up and squinted his eyes with a hint of coldness and said, "Let him prepare a proof of allegiance. If he is sincere, I will meet him and guarantee him a bright future." "Proof of allegiance? What is it?" Song Wenji's eyes flashed and asked in a low voice. Immortal Tiehu sneered and said, "He naturally knows." Chapter 566. Indeed, Atsu did not follow Lu Qin for the past few days. In the eyes of the black dog, it was usually protecting this good-for-nothing. At the same time, It took some of its favorite monster meat from Lu Chen's hands or the mysterious tree hole as a form of reward. Of course, the most important thing was that Lu Chen had protected it back then. It was Sir Atsu who cherished old friendships that led it to protect Lu Chen. However, even though Atsu's strength had greatly increased after its transformation into a holy beast, it had to admit that although Lu Chen did not seem to have changed much on the surface, he gave off a different vibe than before. It was probably a very intimidating vibe. Ordinary people, even people like Old Ma who were close to Lu Chen, would not notice this. It was only in front of Atsu that Lu Chen would sometimes let down his guard a little and reveal that slightly terrifying aura. Atsu was no stranger to that kind of aura. It had felt that murderous aura several times before. On some nights when it woke up in the middle of the night, it would suddenly feel that Lu Chen and itself were two burning flames, dark, blazing flames. That kind of aura was very dangerous. If it got too close, it might be sucked into it and burned to pieces. It was terrifying. However, Atsu was not afraid of this, because it felt that its connection with Lu Chen had become closer. However, occasionally, it would also notice that it seemed to suddenly have a kind of bloodthirsty and murderous thoughts. When it saw a weak animal or beast, it would want to tear it apart and drink its blood, but it had no interest in meat. Atsu did not like this idea, and it even felt a little disgusted. Fortunately, each time this feeling appeared, it was very short, and every time, Atsu would quickly wake up. It could not speak and it could not express itself. It could not explain it clearly to Lu Chen, and it was not very willing to. Atsu felt that although Lu Chen used to look quite smart, it seemed to be smarter than him now. If he couldn't figure it out, Lu Chen wouldn't be able to do anything about it, so he had to think of another way. That was why Atsu had left Lu Chen behind for the past few days. Lu Chen's strength had probably increased by quite a bit in secret, so protecting himself wouldn't be a problem. Atsu, on the other hand, had more important things to do. It was not only for itself, but also for Lu Chen. That guy was so stupid, and with the black fire, he must have the same problem as itself. It had to find a solution and a way out for the two of them. Well, before going to Kunlun Mountain, Atsu actually couldn't come up with any good ideas after thinking for a long time. Until now, the oxen that had been hiding in the depths of Kunlun Mountain suddenly followed them to the immortal city. This was the first time Lu Chen and the black dog saw oxen appear on Mount Celestial Dragon. For example, it wasn't afraid of Lu Chen at all, because it knew that Lu Chen was good to it. Even if Lu Chen scolded it on a daily basis, he wouldn't harm it. However, that damn Baldy was different. If it angered him, he might really trample it to death. Oxen quickly sensed this, so it started to walk out of the palace. Then, it calmly brought Black Dog around Mount Tianlong. The people on Mount Zhengxianmeng all retreated. Often, a cow and a dog could be seen walking on the main road, while a group of people hid by the roadside and looked at them curiously. Oxen turned a blind eye to this, and Atsu was very happy. It felt very cool. Then, Atsu didn't have enough composure, so it laughed and expressed it. Oxen was very disdainful of this, but it didn't care. Later, it started to walk down Mount Tianlong with Atsu and wander around Immortal City. Oxen and Black Dog's body shape was very eye-catching and prominent. At first glance, it was obvious that they weren't ordinary water buffaloes and native dogs. Their skin color, their body shape, and their spirit, it was obvious that they were either spirit beasts or rare spiritual creatures. If they were captured, they would be worth a lot of money. Therefore, it instantly attracted the attention of countless people, and many people made a move. A small half of these people were crushed and killed by Oxen and Atsu, while the other half were killed by the people of Zhengxianmeng and Fuyunji, who were full of disdain and contempt. Most of the time, they would even curse, "Spirit beasts who dare to strut around on the streets of Immortal City like this, how dare you have the guts to have evil thoughts?" What he said made a lot of sense. Beasts were stronger than humans. This reality was quickly accepted and acknowledged by everyone. Then, when Oxen and Atsu walked on the streets, no one dared to stop them anymore. Instead, everyone hid far away. Until one day, when Oxen and Atsu walked on a long street, Atsu was chewing on a meat bone that it had picked up from God knows where, when it saw oxen suddenly stop in its tracks. Atsu looked out in surprise and saw a place in front of them that was surrounded by layers of cloth. Oxen looked at that place, and it was rare for him to be silent for a long time. Then, it suddenly took a step forward and walked behind the curtain. In a secluded corner of the street, a pair of bright and clear eyes looked at Oxen's back, and a trace of coldness flashed across its eyes. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.